The night was alive with laughter and chatter, the kind of noise that always filled the air when people gathered in groups to celebrate their own importance. The music was loud, pulsing through the floor, vibrating the walls. Clara sat in the corner, her back pressed against the cold wall, trying to make herself invisible. She didn't really want to be here. Her mother had insisted she attend this party. You need to get out there, meet people, have some fun, she had said, though Clara could hear the doubt in her voice. Clara didn't have many friends, and the ones she did have, Mia mostly, weren't here. The people around her felt like strangers, and the pressure to fit in was overwhelming. She adjusted her dress, a simple black number she'd bought with her last paycheck. It was nice enough, but she wasn't used to dressing up. She preferred the comfort of loose jeans and a hoodie. But tonight, she tried. Tonight, she had to try. Clara, right? A guy's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her from her cocoon of discomfort. She looked up, meeting the eyes of a guy she recognized vaguely. A classmate, maybe, or one of the people her mom knew. His smile seemed genuine, but there was a playful twinkle in his eye that made her uneasy. "You're so quiet. You know, we could really use a little entertainment around here." Clara's brow furrowed. She wasn't sure how to respond. She shifted in her seat, trying to hide the nervousness creeping into her chest. "Well, it's like this," the guy continued, his voice carrying over the music. "Everyone's been talking about you. Everyone's been saying you've got this amazing voice. We've heard you sing, right?" He laughed, clearly thinking the whole thing was a joke. Clara swallowed hard, her stomach twisting into knots. "They've heard me sing." The only people who knew about her voice were Mia and her mom. Clara had never sung in front of anyone else, not like this. She had only let loose in the safety of her room, or sometimes alone in the kitchen, where no one could hear her. The idea of singing in front of strangers, especially people who saw her as nothing more than a quiet, shy girl from the wrong side of town, felt impossible. But then she saw it. The look in his eyes. The challenge. The laughter bubbling in the background, the murmurs growing louder, and the way the other people around her leaned in. He was daring her. They were daring her. "Come on, Clara," someone shouted from across the room, egging her on. "Prove us wrong." Clara could feel the heat of their eyes on her, and for a moment, her mind raced. Should she just walk away? Should she tell them she didn't feel like performing tonight? She felt her body tense, her heartbeat quicken. But then, something unexpected happened. Something deep inside her, the part of her that dreamed of being heard, that wanted to be more than the quiet girl who never said much, told her to stand up, to show them that she wasn't afraid. She pushed herself out of her seat, feeling the eyes on her, the weight of judgment hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. Her legs felt shaky as she walked toward the small makeshift stage in the corner. The crowd hushed slightly as she climbed onto the platform, the hum of conversation slowly dying down. The room felt smaller now. Clara felt small. She stood in the spotlight for a few seconds, trying to breathe through the tightness in her chest. There was a microphone in front of her, and she reached out with trembling hands, gripping it like a lifeline. The music had faded into the background, leaving only the pounding of her heart in her ears. Just breathe, she thought. It's just one song. You can do this. She closed her eyes for a brief second, steadying herself. Her throat felt dry, and the thought of the judgment that would come if she failed made her stomach churn. But there was also something else, something that felt like fire in her veins, a spark of defiance that told her this was her moment. The DJ signaled for her to begin. The silence that followed felt heavy, almost unbearable. Clara took a deep breath and began to sing. The first note escaped her lips, tentative, almost fragile. It was nothing spectacular, just a simple, soft hum as she tried to steady herself. She had sung plenty of times before, but it had always been in private. Now, she was exposed. Her voice felt small against the loud atmosphere of the party, swallowed up by the bass thumping through the speakers. But then something shifted. The crowd, which had been watching her with skepticism and amusement, started to quiet. There was a murmur of surprise, a ripple of disbelief. Clara felt her heart race, her nerves beginning to settle as the notes began to pour out of her. She stopped thinking about the people around her and focused on the music. Her voice was richer now, deeper, stronger than she had ever imagined it could be. Each note seemed to vibrate in the air, filling the room with something powerful, something they didn't expect. Her voice became a story, telling of every hardship she'd ever faced, every moment of fear, every ounce of longing. It was raw and honest in a way that surprised even Clara. She wasn't just singing, she was pouring herself into the melody, letting the music lift her higher than she thought was possible. The room, once filled with laughter and idle chatter, was now silent. Clara could feel the eyes on her, but this time, the weight wasn't heavy. It was different. She was seen, for the first time in a long time. People weren't seeing just the shy girl from the wrong side of town. They were seeing her for who she truly was, someone with a voice that could move them, that could make them feel. When the final note hung in the air, Clara opened her eyes. The silence felt different now. The room was still, but the energy had shifted. The people who had once mocked her, who had dared her to sing as a joke, were staring at her in disbelief. Some were stunned, others unsure of how to react. And then, one by one, the applause started. It wasn't loud at first, but it built, growing stronger with each passing second until the entire room was clapping. Clara's heart hammered in her chest as she stood frozen, her mind spinning. She had done it. She had actually done it. But even as the applause washed over her, she couldn't help but feel a wave of self-doubt. She had sung, yes, but did they really hear her? Did they understand the vulnerability she had put on display? Or had it just been a fleeting moment, something they would forget by tomorrow? Clara, Mia's voice cut through the crowd, sharp and clear. That was incredible. Clara turned to find her best friend standing at the edge of the stage, eyes wide with admiration. Mia's words hit her harder than any applause. She had heard it. She understood. But the room? They were still looking at her like she was a puzzle they couldn't quite figure out. And as Clara stepped down from the stage, her heart still racing, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Something had changed tonight. The girl they thought they knew, the shy, quiet, almost invisible girl, had just silenced the room with her voice. And in that moment, Clara knew that she had a choice, to either let this be the last time they doubted her, or to prove to the world that this was only the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Clara's heart was still pounding when she returned to her seat, the applause lingering in her ears like an echo she couldn't quite shake off. She tried to smile, but it felt forced, unnatural. The weight of the moment had settled on her, and she couldn't tell if it was a weight of relief or of fear. Her hands still trembled as she wrapped them around the edges of her cup, staring down at it as if it could provide some comfort. That was amazing, Clara, Mia's voice cut through the fog of her thoughts. Mia had appeared beside her, eyes wide, her voice thick with awe. Clara looked up, meeting her friend's gaze. She could see the admiration, but also something else, something almost protective. Mia always had her back, even when Clara couldn't understand why. I didn't think it was going to come out like that, Clara whispered, still in disbelief. I mean, I've sung before, but, not like that. Clara, Mia said softly, her eyes locking onto hers, you've always had that in you. I've seen it. We've all seen it. Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She had always known she could sing, but the idea of showing people that side of herself had always been so terrifying. She was used to hiding behind her quiet nature, afraid that her true self would make others uncomfortable. That night, she had exposed something that she didn't even fully understand. Her voice, her soul, it was all out there, raw and unguarded. But as the applause died down and the music picked back up, Clara's doubts crept back in. The reactions from the others had been a mix of surprise, admiration, and, for a few, the uncomfortable silence that followed her last note. She could still feel their eyes on her, like they were waiting for something more, something she wasn't sure she could give. A voice interrupted her thoughts. It was the same guy from earlier, the one who had dared her to sing. He had been watching her from across the room, his expression less playful now, more intrigued. "Clara, right?" he said, his tone different from before. "That was incredible. I didn't expect that." Clara stiffened slightly, but Mia placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Thank you," Clara replied, forcing herself to sound composed, even though she was anything but. "Do you perform anywhere?" The guy's question seemed innocent enough, but Clara noticed the way his eyes flickered with something more. Was it curiosity? Or maybe just the typical fleeting interest that came with discovering someone new and interesting? "No," Clara said quickly, "I don't really perform. I just sing sometimes." Mia raised an eyebrow, sensing Clara's hesitation. "What he means is, you should totally come check out the local open mic night next week," she chimed in, giving Clara an encouraging nudge. "You'd kill it." Clara shook her head, unsure of how to handle the sudden shift in attention. She wasn't used to people talking about her like this, like she could actually be something more than just the quiet girl at the back of the room. She wasn't ready for that, not yet. "I don't know," Clara's voice trailed off as her gaze flickered back to the group that had gathered around. The same people who had mocked her, who had dared her to sing as a joke. Now they were looking at her differently, with something that resembled awe in their eyes, and Clara didn't know how to feel about that. "Well, you're definitely welcome to join us," the guy insisted, his tone softening. "You have a gift, Clara. You should share it." Clara nodded, unsure how to respond. She appreciated the compliment, but the idea of sharing her voice with the world, of becoming the center of attention in a way she had never been before, felt too overwhelming. Mia, sensing her discomfort, stepped in. "Thanks, but we're good for now. We'll think about it." The guy gave a small nod, but Clara could tell he wasn't convinced. Still, he didn't press the issue, and after a few moments, he melted back into the crowd, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts. She glanced around the room again, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. This wasn't just a fluke. People had actually listened. They had heard her. Clara's mind raced with the possibilities, the fears, and the dreams that swirled inside her, vying for attention. "I'm sorry, Mia," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what just happened. I'm not like this. I'm not like them." She gestured vaguely toward the others who were still gathered, talking and laughing like everything was normal, unaware of the storm Clara was weathering inside her. "You don't have to be like them," Mia said, her voice firm. "You're Clara. That's all you need to be." Clara met her friend's gaze, feeling the weight of her words settle over her like a comforting blanket. It was the kind of support that made Clara feel both small and huge at the same time. But Mia's words didn't erase the gnawing feeling in her chest. The feeling that maybe this wasn't just a one-time thing. Maybe this was the beginning of something more, something Clara wasn't sure she was ready for. The next few days were a blur. Clara tried to go back to her normal routine, burying herself in work, doing her best to forget about the party. But every time she closed her eyes, she could still hear the echoes of her voice in the room, the shocked silence, followed by the applause. Her phone buzzed one afternoon as she sat on the couch, scrolling through social media. It was a message from Mia. "Mia. Hey, I know you're probably still trying to process everything, but you need to check your DMs. You've got messages from some of the people at the party. They're all asking if you're going to perform again. It's not just me who thinks you've got something special, Clara. You've got people talking." Clara stared at the message for a long time, the weight of Mia's words pressing down on her. People were talking. They hadn't forgotten. In fact, the opposite seemed true, they wanted more. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. That evening, Clara found herself sitting alone on the front steps of her apartment, staring out at the city lights that flickered in the distance. Her mind kept going back to that night, the night she had stood in front of everyone and bared her soul with just her voice. Was this what I was meant to do? She wondered. Could I really do this? Could I really sing in front of people? Her breath hitched at the thought of standing on a stage again. But there was something else, too, a feeling she couldn't quite shake. A flicker of hope. Maybe she wasn't just the quiet girl from the wrong side of town. Maybe there was more to her than that. And for the first time in a long time, Clara allowed herself to wonder, what if this was just the beginning? She stood up, brushing the dirt from her jeans. She didn't have all the answers, but one thing was certain. She couldn't run from this anymore. Clara was ready to find out what came next. The week following the party was a whirlwind of confusion and unexpected attention. Clara hadn't anticipated that one night, one brief moment, could change so much. She hadn't even planned on singing in front of anyone, let alone become the subject of a buzz she couldn't control. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages and notifications. People she hadn't spoken to in years reached out to her, congratulating her or asking about her plans. Some of the messages were from people she knew, classmates, distant relatives, and acquaintances, but others were from strangers, people who had been at the party and had been left speechless by what she had done. Clara hadn't expected this level of reaction. She thought it would all fade, a one-off event everyone would forget about in a few days. But it hadn't. It was just the opposite. Mia had called her the morning after the party, a hint of excitement in her voice. "You've got to check your Instagram," Mia said, practically breathless. "You're blowing up, Clara. People are talking about you everywhere. They want to hear more." Clara had hesitated before scrolling through her notifications, the weight of it all pressing down on her. The messages ranged from polite congratulations to genuine questions about when she would be singing again. There were also messages asking for her contact info, just in case she wanted to join an open mic event or be part of something bigger. It was overwhelming, to say the least. But, despite the initial shock, there was a part of her that felt the pull. The thought of standing in front of a crowd again, this time maybe for something bigger than a party, was terrifying, but it also lit something inside her. Something she wasn't sure she was ready to admit. Saturday arrived, and Clara found herself in the same coffee shop where she had met Mia the previous week. The familiar hum of chatter and the scent of roasting coffee beans was comforting. But today, Clara wasn't alone. Mia had called her earlier in the week, insisting they meet to talk about the next step. Clara wasn't sure what that meant, but she trusted Mia, and if anyone could make sense of all this, it was her best friend. Mia arrived fashionably late, as usual, with a wide grin plastered on her face. Clara couldn't help but smile in return. It was hard not to feel lighter when Mia was around. "So," Mia began, pulling up a chair and sitting across from Clara, "I've got some serious news. Are you ready for it?" Clara raised an eyebrow. "Is it more random messages about me singing? Because, seriously, Mia, I didn't think my one song at that party would cause such a frenzy." "Not just messages," Mia grinned, clearly enjoying the suspense. "I've got a contact, an actual contact from a local talent agency. They've seen the video of you singing. They want to meet you." Clara's heart skipped a beat. The words, talent agency, seemed to echo in her head. This wasn't just a joke anymore. People weren't just talking about her out of curiosity. They were interested. "I don't know, Mia," Clara said quietly, her fingers tapping nervously on her cup. This is too much. I didn't expect any of this. I just sang because they dared me. I didn't think it would lead to this." I know it feels crazy, Mia said, her voice calming, but you've got something, Clara. It's real. This isn't just some fleeting thing. You can't ignore it. Don't let fear hold you back. Clara swallowed, looking down at her coffee. She could feel the uncertainty swirling in her chest, threatening to drown her. What if I'm not good enough? She thought. What if they're just impressed by a one-time thing? What if I'm not ready? Clara whispered. What if I mess it all up? Mia leaned forward, placing her hand on Clara's. You don't have to have all the answers right now. You don't have to take everything on at once. But you owe it to yourself to at least see what they want. You can't let fear decide your future. You've already taken the first step by singing. Don't stop now. Clara looked into her friend's eyes. There was so much belief in them, so much hope. Mia was right. Fear had controlled her for so long. It had kept her from taking risks, from going after what she truly wanted. Maybe it was time to stop letting it dictate her choices. Maybe it was time to see what else was out there. I'll meet with them, Clara said finally, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. But I'm not promising anything. I'm just curious. Mia's face lit up. That's the spirit. I know you've got this. Clara couldn't help but feel a flicker of something close to excitement. She hadn't been excited about much in a long time, but this? This felt like a chance. A real chance. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Clara didn't know what to expect from this meeting with the talent agency, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change. She spent hours on YouTube, watching videos of other singers, trying to figure out how to present herself, what kind of songs to sing. She wasn't just Clara anymore. She was someone with potential, someone who might just be able to take that next step. When the day of the meeting arrived, Clara couldn't help but feel a little nervous. She stood in front of the mirror, smoothing down the dress she'd chosen, a simple, yet elegant blue dress that made her feel both comfortable and confident. She wasn't used to dressing up, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she was showing up for herself. She arrived at the agency's office with plenty of time to spare, but the nerves didn't subside. The office was sleek and modern, with glass walls and abstract art decorating the space. Clara was greeted by a young woman in her 20s, who led her into a small conference room. Clara, right? The woman smiled warmly. We're so glad you could make it today. The video of your performance last week really impressed us. We think you've got a real shot. Clara smiled nervously, trying not to let her anxiety show. Thanks. I didn't expect all this. The woman, whose name was Sarah, laughed. No one ever does. But that's the thing about raw talent, it finds a way to be heard, even when you're not looking for it. Clara nodded, unsure of what to say. Her heart was still racing, but she knew she couldn't back out now. She was here. She had to at least try. Do you have a song in mind that you'd like to sing for us today? Sarah asked. Clara's breath hitched. She hadn't prepared anything specific. She hadn't even planned on singing at all. But there was one song, a song she always turned to when she needed to feel grounded. Something About the Way You Look Tonight by Elton John. It was a soft, slow ballad, and something about the melody always calmed her. Actually, Clara said, her voice quieter than usual, I'd like to sing a song I've always loved. If that's okay. Of course, Sarah said, settling back in her chair. We're here to hear you. Taking a deep breath, Clara stepped up to the small stage at the back of the room. She adjusted the microphone, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. The spotlight wasn't as bright as the one from the party, but it was enough. Clara closed her eyes, focused on the song in her heart, and began to sing. The first note came out softly, uncertain at first, but as she found her rhythm, the confidence came. Her voice filled the room with warmth, the song wrapping itself around her like an old friend. Clara let go, allowing herself to sink into the music, to let her soul be heard. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Sarah and the others in the room exchanged glances, and Clara's heart began to race again. She had done her best, but had it been enough? Finally, Sarah spoke. "Clara," she said softly, her voice filled with something close to awe. "That was incredible. We're going to sign you. This is just the beginning." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had done it. She had really done it. And for the first time, Clara allowed herself to believe it. She was no longer the quiet girl in the corner. She was someone worth listening to. The week after Clara's meeting with the talent agency was nothing short of a dream. It felt as though her life had been catapulted into a world she wasn't sure she was ready for, but it was one she couldn't ignore anymore. She had signed a preliminary contract with the agency, which meant everything had just changed. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. She wasn't just a girl with a good voice anymore, she was a singer. She was someone with potential, someone whose name might one day be known beyond her small circle of friends. The future felt both thrilling and terrifying, and she wasn't sure which emotion was stronger. The agency had immediately begun preparing her for her debut. She had been given a vocal coach, and they were working with her to refine her technique, her stage presence, and even her image. Clara was overwhelmed, but there was an undercurrent of excitement that she couldn't shake. The first few days were grueling. Clara was thrust into a whirlwind of rehearsals, vocal training, and meetings that left her little time to process what was happening. At first, she found herself struggling to keep up with the intensity of it all. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, and suddenly, there were people telling her what to wear, how to stand, how to sound. It felt like too much, too fast. But as the days passed, Clara began to realize something: she loved it. The vocal coach, a woman named Rachel, was patient and kind, but also pushed Clara in ways she didn't know she could be pushed. Clara had always sung with her heart, but Rachel taught her to use her voice more strategically. There were moments when Clara felt like she was on the verge of breaking, but Rachel would always catch her before she fell. "You've got it in you, Clara," Rachel would say, after each practice session. "I'm just helping you find it." The most surprising part of it all, though, was how quickly Clara's confidence began to grow. She could see it in the mirror when she sang, a spark in her eyes she had never seen before. It was as if she had unlocked something inside herself, something that had been hidden for years. Then came the photo shoot. It was part of her debut, part of the effort to create an image that matched her new identity as a rising star. Clara had never imagined she would be in front of a camera, let alone having her picture taken professionally. But when she walked into the studio that day, there was no turning back. The stylist was already waiting for her, a whirlwind of energy that left Clara a little dizzy. "You're going to look amazing," she promised, pulling Clara into a chair and quickly getting to work. Her hair was styled in soft waves, and her makeup was subtle but emphasized her features. The clothes they had chosen were a mix of edgy and classic, designed to convey strength and elegance all at once. Clara couldn't help but stare at herself in the mirror. She looked so different, and yet, at the same time, it felt like the most authentic version of herself she had ever seen. The photographer, a tall man named Greg, directed her through the shoot with a gentle but firm hand. "Look fierce," he said, his voice calm but insistent. "But also vulnerable. You've got to show them the depth of who you are." Clara didn't know if she could do that. Vulnerable? Her whole life, she had hidden behind a wall, not showing anyone her true self. How could she be vulnerable in front of an entire world that was about to judge her? But as the shoot progressed, Clara began to let go. She allowed herself to feel the music in her soul and the power in her voice. With each click of the camera, she felt herself opening up a little more, revealing the parts of her she had always kept hidden. When the shoot was over, Greg smiled at her and said, "That's exactly what we need. You've got it, Clara. I can already see the power in you. The shoot ended, but Clara felt something shift inside her. It wasn't just the photos that had captured her, it was her. For the first time in her life, she didn't just feel like a girl with a pretty voice. She felt like someone who could stand tall, someone who could command the room. A few days later, Clara was sitting in her apartment, looking at the contract again. The terms were clear. She had signed with the agency, and they were already planning her first live performance. Mia had been her rock throughout the entire process, always there to remind Clara of how far she had come. You were made for this, Mia told her, as they sat on the couch, sipping iced tea one afternoon. I knew you had it in you, Clara. You just had to see it for yourself. Clara smiled, but there was a lingering doubt in her mind. What if I mess it up? What if they don't like me? What if this whole thing was a mistake? Mia laughed softly and shook her head. You won't mess it up. You're Clara. You've been working for this your entire life. Just trust yourself. Clara took a deep breath and nodded. She was scared, so scared. But Mia was right. This was her shot. This was what she had been waiting for, whether she had realized it or not. The night of her first performance arrived faster than Clara had expected. She had rehearsed for weeks, but nothing could prepare her for the feeling of walking onto a stage in front of an audience for the first time. The venue was small but trendy, a cozy club with a packed crowd that buzzed with anticipation. The lights were dimmed, and Clara stood backstage, her heart thudding in her chest. She felt a familiar knot in her stomach, the kind she always got before a big event. But this time, something else was there, too. A feeling of purpose. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Her manager, a woman named Emma, gave her a reassuring smile. You're going to be amazing, she said. Just take a deep breath. You've got this. Clara nodded, but her mind was spinning. This was it. There was no going back. The stagehand gave her a nod, signaling that it was time. Clara stepped out, the lights blinding at first. She squinted into the darkness, trying to focus on the rows of faces staring up at her. The crowd was a blur of shapes and shadows, but Clara could hear their murmur of excitement. They were waiting for her. She took a deep breath and walked to the center of the stage, the microphone stand in front of her like an anchor. The band behind her started to play, and Clara's pulse quickened. She closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself, remembering the lessons she had learned from Rachel. Then, with a steadying breath, Clara sang. The first notes were shaky, but soon she found her rhythm. The music filled the room, and Clara's voice soared, the power behind it surprising even her. She wasn't just singing a song, she was telling a story, one that only she could tell. With each note, the nerves melted away. The fear became excitement. She felt alive in a way she never had before. And when the last note rang out, Clara opened her eyes to find the crowd staring at her in stunned silence. Then, it happened. The applause. It was loud, deafening even, and Clara couldn't believe it. She had done it. She had taken the stage, and she had owned it. And as she stood there, breathless and overwhelmed, Clara knew one thing for sure, this was just the beginning. The euphoria of her first live performance lingered in Clara's chest for days. The applause, the lights, the energy of the crowd, it was everything she had hoped for and more. But beneath the surface, there was a nagging feeling she couldn't shake, a feeling that came with the territory of success and exposure, pressure. After the performance, the agency's team congratulated her, but the mood was different now. There was a new intensity in their eyes, a sense of urgency in the way they spoke. It wasn't just about singing anymore, it was about delivering. Clara, that was great, Emma, her manager, said as they sat in the green room after the show. But this is just the start. You're getting more attention than we expected, and that means we need to get ready for the next step. We've got some bigger venues lined up. Clara swallowed. Bigger venues? The thought sent a ripple of anxiety through her. I don't know if I'm ready for that, she stammered. I barely got through tonight. What if I fail? Emma leaned forward, her voice firm but kind. Listen to me. You've got something special. The way you connected with the crowd tonight, it's undeniable. But the pressure's only going to get higher. You need to keep pushing yourself. The pressure was only going to get higher. Those words echoed in Clara's mind long after Emma left her alone in the dressing room. She hadn't expected it to feel like this. When she signed with the agency, she imagined living her dream, getting to perform, and being celebrated for her voice. But now that she was here, in the thick of it, she realized how much was at stake. Her career, her image, her future, everything was tied to her next steps. And yet, a part of her was still just that shy girl from the party. The one who never wanted to be in the spotlight. Over the next few weeks, Clara's schedule became a blur. Rehearsals every day, photo shoots for press coverage, interviews with local radio stations, there was barely a moment to breathe. Her vocal coach Rachel pushed her hard, trying to perfect every aspect of her performance, and the pressure to meet the agency's expectations was mounting. At first, Clara enjoyed the attention, the rush of it all. But as time went on, she started to feel like a machine, just another product to be polished and sold. The joy she had felt in singing began to fade beneath the weight of constant rehearsals and the growing fear of not being good enough. It wasn't just the external pressure that was getting to her. It was the internal doubt. Every time she stepped onto the stage, she felt like she was carrying the weight of every expectation on her shoulders. Would she be able to live up to the hype? Could she sustain this success? And what if the next performance wasn't as perfect as the last one? One afternoon, Clara found herself sitting alone in a small cafe near the studio, staring at her reflection in the window. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows across the street. She had just finished another exhausting rehearsal, and the tension in her body seemed to stretch endlessly. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at it, another message from Mia. Hey, are you okay? I haven't heard from you in a while. I miss our talks. Clara's heart ached as she read the message. Mia had always been her rock, the one person who knew her inside and out. But lately, she hadn't had the time or energy to keep in touch. She had been so consumed with work that she felt like she was drifting away from everyone she cared about. Clara tapped out a quick reply, I'm fine. Just busy. A lot going on. But was she fine? Clara wasn't sure anymore. The bright, hopeful girl who had stepped into the agency's office a few months ago felt like she was slipping away, replaced by someone who was constantly chasing perfection. The dream was still alive, but the pressure was starting to suffocate her. That night, Clara lay in bed, her mind racing. She couldn't sleep, not with all the doubts and worries swirling in her head. It had been a long time since she had truly felt herself, the carefree girl who sang for fun, who wasn't concerned with being perfect. She missed that girl. She missed the version of herself that wasn't constantly trying to measure up to everyone else's standards. But the industry was ruthless. Clara had seen it firsthand. She had already been handed an opportunity most people would kill for, and she couldn't afford to let it slip away. But at what cost? Just as she was about to drift off, her phone rang. It was Emma. Clara, I need you to come in tomorrow, Emma's voice was clipped, urgent. We've got an interview with a major magazine, this is big. They want to feature you as the next rising star in music. Clara sat up, blinking at the ceiling. She didn't know if she was ready for more attention, more expectations, but she knew better than to turn down an opportunity like this. The agency had already started to build her image, and she wasn't about to be the one to ruin it. I'll be there, Clara said, her voice hollow. Good, Emma replied. We'll make sure you're ready. The next day, Clara found herself in a posh magazine office, surrounded by flashing cameras and reporters. The room was full of bright lights and sharp suits, and Clara suddenly felt like an imposter in the midst of it all. She had always been comfortable in her own skin, but now, with all the attention on her, she felt smaller than ever. The interview was more of a photo op than anything else, with Clara being asked the usual questions: her inspiration, her journey to stardom, and what it was like to have such a fast-rising career. She answered as best as she could, but the questions felt like a blur. The smiles felt forced, and the words felt rehearsed. At one point, the reporter asked, "Clara, you've become a voice for so many people. Do you feel the pressure to represent your community in the music industry?" The question caught her off guard. Clara had never thought of herself as a representative of anything other than her own dreams. But now, in front of the camera, she realized just how much her success meant to others. To people who had been overlooked, people who looked like her and had never been given the same opportunities. The weight of that realization settled in her chest. Was she ready to carry that responsibility? Could she be the voice they needed her to be? She gave the best answer she could muster, but in the back of her mind, the pressure grew. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who was watching her, hoping she would succeed, hoping she would break the barriers. When the interview ended, Emma gave her a quick pat on the back. "You did great, Clara. Keep this up, and you'll be everywhere." But as Clara walked out of the magazine office, she felt more uncertain than ever. The fame was real. The success was real. But was she ready to face it? Back in her apartment that night, Clara sat in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. She had spent so long pretending to be confident, but now she wondered if she was truly ready for everything that was coming her way. The world had big expectations for Clara, bigger than she had ever dreamed. But could she live up to them? The pressure was only getting heavier. And Clara had no idea how much longer she could carry it alone. The days following the magazine interview blurred together. Clara felt like she was living in a world where everything was moving too fast, too much at once. She had barely settled into her role as a rising star, and now, it seemed like the weight of everyone's expectations was pressing down on her from all sides. Her rehearsals were becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Every note, every move, was scrutinized by her vocal coach, Rachel. The constant focus on perfection started to feel suffocating. Clara knew Rachel was trying to push her to be better, but it was hard not to feel like everything she did wasn't enough. There were always notes to perfect, always something more to do. She was exhausted, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Despite this, Clara continued to show up. She was determined to prove herself, to show the world that she was worthy of the opportunity she had been given. But beneath that determination, something else was starting to fester. The cracks in her confidence were starting to show, and no amount of rehearsals, no amount of press interviews, could mask the fear creeping in. The turning point came one chilly afternoon, during a particularly grueling rehearsal for an upcoming performance at a larger venue. Clara had just finished running through a new song for the 5th time, her voice cracking slightly on the high notes. Rachel, who had been standing with her arms crossed, let out a sharp sigh. "You're holding back, Clara," she said, her voice cold, her disappointment palpable. "You're not letting go. You have to give more. Feel the song. You're just going through the motions." Clara's throat tightened, the sting of Rachel's words sinking deep into her chest. She felt her eyes burn with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. She couldn't afford to show weakness. Not here. Not now. "I'm trying," Clara whispered, her voice shaky, "I really am." Rachel's expression softened for a moment, but she didn't relent. "I know you are. But if you want to make it, you have to give more. You can't be afraid." Clara swallowed hard, her body tense. The weight of Rachel's words, of everything she was expected to be, felt like it was crushing her. Later that night, Clara found herself standing in front of the mirror again, the same one she had stared into countless times before. But tonight, something felt different. Her reflection didn't feel like her own. The confident, self-assured woman the world was starting to see was nowhere to be found. Instead, the girl in the mirror looked lost, unsure of herself. Her phone buzzed with a new message from Mia. "How are you holding up? I haven't heard from you much lately. Let's catch up soon, okay?" Clara stared at the message, the pang of guilt hitting her once more. She had been so consumed by the demands of her career that she had pushed everyone, her family, her friends, even herself, away. She needed to talk to Mia, to feel grounded again. But could she really open up about how much she was struggling? She typed a quick reply, "I'm good. Just busy. I'll call you soon." But she didn't feel good. Not at all. Clara set the phone down and ran a hand through her hair. She had spent so long chasing this dream, fighting to be seen, to be heard, but now that she was here, she wasn't sure it was worth the cost. The more she performed, the more she was praised, the more she felt herself slipping away from the girl she used to be. The next morning, Clara dragged herself to the studio for another round of rehearsals. Her manager, Emma, was already waiting for her when she arrived, holding a tablet with the latest updates. "We've got more gigs lined up," Emma said with a smile, handing Clara the tablet. "This is the big one, Clara. You're going to be headlining at the Roxy next month. It's a huge venue, a huge opportunity." Clara nodded absently, but the excitement didn't register. The thought of performing in front of a larger crowd should have thrilled her, but instead, it made her feel nauseous. The pressure to be perfect, to meet the ever-growing expectations, was becoming unbearable. Emma continued, oblivious to Clara's growing anxiety. "The promotion for this show is going to be massive. There are a few interviews lined up next week, and we're also starting to plan your next single." Clara smiled weakly, nodding along. But inside, her mind was spiraling. She didn't know how much more she could handle. Each new opportunity felt like a reminder of how far she had to go, and how little control she had over her own life. The rehearsal for the Roxy performance came quickly. Clara showed up, her nerves frayed and her body exhausted from weeks of constant work. She barely had the energy to focus on the music. Rachel was pushing her hard, trying to perfect every note and every movement, and Clara was doing her best to keep up. But the mental and physical exhaustion was starting to take its toll. Her voice wasn't as strong as it used to be, and every time she missed a note or faltered, she felt like she was falling short. The other band members could sense her frustration. Ben, the lead guitarist, gave her a sympathetic glance between songs. "You okay, Clara?" he asked softly. She forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine," she replied, but her voice lacked conviction. Ben didn't buy it. "You don't look fine." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She hated that people could see through her. She wasn't ready to admit it, but she was starting to crack under the pressure. Ben seemed to sense that, too, and he reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Hey, it's okay to not be okay. You don't have to do this alone." Clara froze. For a moment, she felt a rush of relief. Someone saw her. But the weight of her situation settled back into her chest, and she pulled away from him. "I'm fine," she repeated, her voice sharp this time. "Let's just finish this rehearsal." But the damage had already been done. Clara couldn't ignore the truth anymore. She was far from fine. That night, Clara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her body was exhausted, but her mind was racing. The fear, the doubt, the overwhelming pressure, it was all too much. And the worst part was that she had no one to turn to. Not really. She couldn't talk to Rachel or Emma, they were too invested in her success. And she didn't want to burden Mia, not when she was already so busy with her own life. So, Clara kept it all inside, letting the walls of pressure build around her. She closed her eyes, wishing for a moment of peace, but the silence only brought more questions. Was this what she wanted? Was it worth losing herself for? In the quiet of the night, Clara realized something she hadn't allowed herself to admit before: she was terrified. Terrified of failing, terrified of not being enough, terrified of losing everything she had worked for. But more than that, she was terrified of losing herself along the way. The world might see her as a star, but Clara wasn't sure who she was anymore. The days blurred into a constant haze of rehearsals, interviews, and performances. Clara was moving through life like a machine, her body running on empty but her determination pushing her forward. She had no choice. She couldn't afford to stop, to show weakness. Every time she thought about slowing down, the image of the stage, the lights, the people who believed in her, and the people who were waiting for her to fail, spurred her to keep going. But the cracks were starting to show more clearly now. The exhaustion was no longer just physical. Clara could feel it seeping into her bones, into her spirit. The things that once brought her joy, like singing and performing, now felt like tasks. And the applause? It felt like an obligation, not a reward. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, after a particularly grueling rehearsal for an upcoming showcase, that Clara hit her breaking point. She had been fighting through a sore throat for days, masking it with throat lozenges and warm tea, but today, it was worse. Her voice was raspy, and no matter how many times she tried to warm up, it didn't feel right. "Clara," Rachel called, her tone sharp. "You're not giving it your all today. You need to power through this." I don't feel well," Clara said, her voice cracking in the middle of the sentence. She couldn't hold it in anymore. Rachel eyed her with a look of mild annoyance, as though Clara's discomfort was an inconvenience. "If you can't handle the pressure, maybe you should think about whether you're cut out for this." Clara's heart sank. It felt like the final blow, the confirmation that she was, in fact, failing. Her body felt numb, but her mind raced with a whirlwind of self-doubt and shame. She had already let everyone down. Before she could respond, Emma entered the room, her face filled with concern. "Clara, I know you're not feeling your best, but we really need to push through this. We're counting on you." Clara nodded, but inside, she wanted to scream. She didn't know how much longer she could do this. That night, Clara lay in bed, her throat sore and her thoughts a mess. She wanted to sleep, but her mind kept replaying the harsh words from Rachel and Emma. "If you can't handle the pressure, maybe you should think about whether you're cut out for this." The words echoed in her head like a haunting refrain. What if they were right? What if she wasn't cut out for this after all? The fear that had been building in her chest for weeks now threatened to consume her entirely. She sat up in bed, her phone still in her hand. She stared at the screen, wondering if she should reach out to Mia. She needed someone to talk to, someone who would understand. But a part of her was afraid of burdening Mia with her worries, afraid of how her friend might see her if she admitted how much she was struggling. Instead, Clara texted her. "I'm just really tired. It's been a tough few days." There was a long pause before Mia's reply came through. "I get it, Clara. But you've got this. Don't forget who you are." Clara smiled weakly at the message. She didn't feel like she had it together anymore. She didn't even know who she was anymore. The next day, Clara forced herself out of bed, trying to shake off the remnants of the anxiety that had kept her up all night. She had a performance scheduled for the evening, and she couldn't afford to miss it. She had promised everyone that she would be ready. But as she stood in front of the mirror, the weight of the day ahead pressed down on her. Her throat was still sore, her energy was low, and her confidence was non-existent. Emma knocked on the door, her voice cheerful but with an edge of urgency. "Clara, we need to head to the venue in 15. Are you all set?" Clara looked at her reflection, barely recognizing the face staring back at her. The girl in the mirror wasn't the confident performer the world had started to see, she was someone else, someone who felt completely out of place in this world of lights and cameras. "I'll be out in a minute," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. As she stepped out of the room, Emma barely noticed her hesitance. "We've got to make sure you're ready. You don't want to disappoint your fans, right?" Clara nodded, though she wasn't sure if she had anything left to give. The performance was nothing short of flawless. Clara had become an expert at pushing through her pain, masking her exhaustion with the adrenaline that came from performing. The crowd cheered, the lights dazzled, and for a few minutes, Clara could almost believe that she was living her dream again. But as the last note of her song echoed through the venue and the applause rang out, something inside her snapped. The rush, the excitement, it felt hollow. The momentary high faded, and the emptiness that had been gnawing at her for weeks returned with a vengeance. Back in the dressing room, she sat alone for a few moments, her hands trembling. The applause felt distant now, like it had been meant for someone else. Her phone buzzed again, and she reluctantly picked it up. It was Mia. "I'm proud of you, Clara. But don't forget to take care of yourself. You're human, not a machine." The word stung, but in the best way possible. It was exactly what Clara needed to hear. But it was also a reminder of how far she had drifted from the person she used to be, the person who knew how to take care of herself, the person who sang for joy, not for the applause. She sighed deeply, putting the phone down and staring at her reflection in the mirror. The person looking back at her wasn't a star. She was just Clara, a girl who was trying to keep it all together despite the weight of the world on her shoulders. Back in her apartment that night, Clara collapsed onto her couch. She was exhausted in every way possible, physically, emotionally, mentally. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to cry. The tears came without warning, a release she had desperately needed but hadn't allowed herself. She cried for the girl who had chased a dream and lost herself along the way. She cried for the parts of her that felt broken, for the pieces of her soul that had been chipped away in the pursuit of success. She cried for the pressure she had carried alone, for the expectations she had been unable to meet. And as the tears slowed, Clara knew she couldn't keep going like this. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that she had it all under control. She needed help. She needed to find a way back to herself. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in a long while, Clara knew that she couldn't face it alone. She picked up her phone again and dialed Mia's number. "Hey," Clara's voice cracked as she spoke. "I think I need to talk." And for the first time in a long time, Clara felt like maybe, just maybe, she could start to heal. The following days were an uphill battle, but for the first time in weeks, Clara felt like she was actually moving forward, even if just a little. The emotional storm that had plagued her was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but something had shifted. After reaching out to Mia, they talked for hours on the phone, the weight of Clara's fears and doubts spilling out in waves. Mia listened patiently, offering her unwavering support. She didn't offer solutions or advice, but the comfort of just being heard felt like a lifeline. Mia reminded Clara that she didn't have to be perfect, that it was okay to admit when things were hard. That conversation was the first step in a long process of self-reclamation. Clara realized that she didn't have to keep up the facade of being invincible. She could be honest about her struggles. She could take a breath and ask for help. The next few rehearsals were far from perfect, but Clara started to ease up on herself. She gave herself permission to rest when she needed to slow down without the crushing guilt that had once followed every moment of pause. Rachel, ever the taskmaster, noticed the shift, but Clara wasn't willing to let it drag her down. "Clara, you're not giving it your all," Rachel said during one rehearsal, her voice stern. "We can't afford to let up now." "I know," Clara said quietly, but there was a new resolve in her voice. "But I also know I need to take care of myself, Rachel. I can't keep pushing until I break." Rachel paused, her lips pressing together in a thin line. For a moment, Clara thought she might lash out again, but to her surprise, Rachel's expression softened. "You're right," Rachel said after a beat. "I didn't realize how much pressure you were under. We'll work through it, but you need to be honest with me about what you need." Don't hide it. Clara's heart lifted slightly at the shift in Rachel's tone. It wasn't a full transformation, but it was a sign that she was being seen in a way she hadn't been before. In the days that followed, Clara focused on herself as much as her career. She made a conscious effort to sleep better, eat more regularly, and take breaks from the constant whirl of the industry. Her friends checked in on her more often, offering support in ways that didn't demand anything from her. Mia, in particular, helped her find the balance she'd been desperately seeking, telling Clara that it was okay to take a step back and focus on her well-being, even if it meant slowing down the momentum of her career for a moment. The weight on Clara's chest started to ease. She could breathe again. She wasn't completely free of the pressure that had built up over the last few months, but she could at least face it without feeling like she was drowning. It was during a break between rehearsals that Clara sat down with Emma in the studio lounge. Emma had been her manager since the beginning, and although Clara had kept her distance lately, there was a bond there. One that had been tested but not broken. "Clara, I've noticed a shift in you," Emma said, leaning back in her chair and folding her arms. "I'm glad you're taking care of yourself. You've been burning the candle at both ends for too long." Clara looked up, surprised at how genuinely concerned Emma seemed. "Yeah. I didn't realize how much I'd been pushing myself until I hit the wall. But I'm getting back to where I need to be." Emma smiled softly, her eyes searching Clara's face. "You know, you don't have to do it all alone. I'm here to help, always. But I also want you to be happy, Clara. This whole journey, it's supposed to be about your growth, your joy. Don't lose sight of that." Clara felt a lump form in her throat at Emma's words. It had been so easy to forget why she started singing in the first place, to forget the joy it had once brought her. But slowly, she was remembering. She was starting to find herself again. As the week passed, Clara focused on her upcoming performance at the Roxy. This would be her first major show since the breakdown, and it was a huge deal. The pressure was still there, but it felt different now. She wasn't just performing for the fans or the critics. She was performing for herself. She spent hours in front of the mirror, practicing her songs. For the first time, she wasn't chasing perfection, she was chasing authenticity. She wanted her voice to carry the emotions she had been holding back for so long, the rawness of her struggles, the depth of her pain, and the hope that had kept her going despite everything. The night of the performance arrived, and Clara felt a strange sense of calm. The nerves were still there, but they were quieter now, more manageable. She stood backstage, listening to the hum of the crowd beyond the curtain. She could hear the faint murmur of excitement, the chatter of eager fans. The stage lights beckoned, but this time, Clara didn't feel overwhelmed. She felt ready. When the curtain finally lifted, Clara stepped into the spotlight. The crowd's cheers flooded over her, but this time, it didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a welcoming embrace. She began the set with a song she had written herself, one that captured the emotional journey she had been on. The lyrics, raw and vulnerable, seemed to connect with the audience in a way she hadn't anticipated. Her voice, once shaky and uncertain, now felt like an instrument of strength and truth. Each note carried a piece of her soul, and for the first time in a long time, Clara felt like she was singing for herself, no longer for anyone else's approval. The audience hung on to every word. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music wash over her. She had come so far from the girl who once felt invisible, so far from the girl who had tried to mask her pain with perfection. Now, in this moment, Clara was whole again. She wasn't pretending to be someone she wasn't. She was simply herself. After the performance, Clara stood backstage, her chest heaving with the remnants of her final note. The adrenaline was still coursing through her, but the nerves had been replaced by a sense of peace she hadn't felt in months. Emma rushed over, her face beaming. "Clara, that was incredible. You've never sounded better." Rachel, standing off to the side, nodded in agreement. "You found something tonight. That was you on that stage. Clara smiled, feeling something shift deep within her. It wasn't just the praise that mattered. It was the fact that she had finally found herself again, standing in front of an audience that truly saw her. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt at peace with who she was, and where she was going. The applause still echoed in Clara's mind as she walked off stage. She could still feel the warmth of the lights on her face, the vibration of the crowd's energy buzzing through her skin. The performance had been a success, better than she'd expected, but there was no time to savor it. Behind the curtain, everything returned to the harsh reality of the music industry. As Clara made her way back to the dressing room, she could hear the buzz of conversations from the crew, the technicians breaking down the set, and the quiet murmurs of a few fans who had waited at the stage door. But amid the noise, one voice stood out to her, Rachel. "That was a good set," Rachel said, her eyes scanning Clara critically. "But you need to stay consistent. This is just one night. You've got more to prove. We're not done yet." Clara froze. The rush of the performance began to fade as Rachel's words dug into her mind. "You've got more to prove." Clara wanted to respond, to tell her that she was trying her best, but instead, she nodded and forced a smile. "I'll be ready," Clara said quietly. "We can push harder. I'm ready for the next one." But inside, her heart felt heavy. She had just poured everything she had into that performance. She had felt alive, present, and in control, but the weight of expectation seemed to be growing again, threatening to pull her back down. The following week passed in a blur of rehearsals, meetings, and more performances. Clara tried to keep her head above water, but every day felt like a reminder that the industry didn't care about how she felt. All that mattered was her output, her success, her ability to deliver time and time again. The pressure, once again, became suffocating. Rachel and Emma pushed her harder than ever. Every meeting was a reminder that her career was always one step away from the next big opportunity, or the next big failure. Every time Clara thought she might get a moment to breathe, there was a new deadline, a new song to record, a new audience to impress. "You're doing great, but you're not doing enough," Rachel would say after every performance. "We need more. You need to be bigger, bolder, better." One evening, as Clara sat in the back of the car after another grueling show, her phone buzzed with a message from Mia. "How are you doing, Clara? I've been thinking about you a lot." Clara smiled weakly, but the heaviness in her chest didn't dissipate. She could feel herself slipping back into the familiar cycle of exhaustion and self-doubt. But she refused to let Mia see that. She didn't want to worry her friend. "I'm fine. Just tired. You know how it is." But Mia's response was immediate. "I get it, but I'm worried. You don't have to do this alone. Don't let this industry break you." Clara's heart twisted at the words. Mia knew her too well. But the truth was, Clara didn't know how to let go. She didn't know how to step away from the whirlwind that had become her life. Everything, her career, her reputation, felt too fragile to step back from. The moment she stopped pushing, the moment she took a break, she was afraid of losing everything she'd fought for. She sighed deeply and typed back a quick response. "I'll be fine. Just need a little time to catch my breath. I'll talk to you soon." As soon as she sent the message, Clara felt the pang of guilt. She wasn't fine. She was far from it. But admitting that felt like admitting defeat. And she couldn't afford that. Clara's next show was in 2 days, and she had barely slept or eaten properly. She knew she needed to be at her best, but her body felt like it was shutting down. She had developed a cough, and her throat was scratchy again. Her muscles ached, her mind was foggy, and she was struggling to keep her eyes open. Emma noticed the signs. She'd been around enough performers to recognize when someone was running on empty. "Clara, you're not looking so good. You need rest before the show," she said, voice tinged with concern. "You can't perform at your best if you're this run down." Clara shook her head, trying to push past the overwhelming fatigue. I can do this. Just need to power through. We've got too much riding on this show. Emma frowned but didn't argue. All right. But I'm going to talk to Rachel. If you keep pushing like this, you'll burn out. And that's not good for anyone. Clara nodded, appreciating the concern, but her mind was already racing. She couldn't afford to stop. She had worked too hard for this, and she wasn't going to let a little fatigue stand in the way. Later that evening, as Clara tried to rest in her hotel room, she found herself staring at the ceiling. She couldn't shake the feeling that the more she succeeded, the more she lost herself in the process. The world of fame, of constant expectations and performance, was taking its toll on her. She had started this journey to share her voice, to connect with people on a deep level, but somewhere along the way, her voice had become just another tool to meet the demands of the industry. What happened to singing for joy? What happened to singing because it was her passion, not because she had to meet a quota or please a crowd? As the hours ticked by, Clara made a decision. She couldn't go on like this. She needed to regain control of her life, to find balance before it was too late. The night of the show arrived, and Clara barely felt ready. She had done everything she could to push through the exhaustion, but it wasn't enough. As the lights dimmed and the crowd erupted in applause, Clara took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage, a forced smile on her face. The crowd cheered for her, as they always did. But tonight, Clara couldn't feel the same spark she once had. She sang each note with precision, but her heart wasn't in it. She had been so focused on meeting expectations that she had forgotten to feel the music, to let herself get lost in it. The performance was flawless, but it felt hollow. The cheers were distant, and Clara felt more alone than she ever had before. Backstage, as Clara removed the microphone from her ear and wiped the sweat from her brow, she was met by Rachel and Emma, both with expressions of approval. "You nailed it," Rachel said, though her words didn't have the usual fire. "But there's more we can do. We can make the next show even bigger." Clara forced a smile, but the words felt empty. She wasn't sure how much more she had left to give. Emma noticed the shift in Clara's demeanor. "You all right?" she asked, her voice softer now. Clara looked up at her, and for the first time in weeks, she admitted what she had been too afraid to say. "I don't know if I can keep doing this. Not like this." Emma didn't reply right away, but Clara could see the understanding in her eyes. There was no judgment, only concern. "It's okay to take a step back, Clara," Emma said quietly. "You don't have to be everything all at once." And for the first time in what felt like ages, Clara allowed herself to feel something that had been missing for so long, relief. The next few days felt like a blur for Clara. She had given the performance everything she had, but it wasn't enough. No amount of rehearsing, no amount of effort could fill the emptiness she felt after stepping off that stage. She had been searching for meaning in every note, in every cheer, but it wasn't there. She had been so focused on external validation that she had lost sight of why she started this journey in the first place. After the show, Clara went back to her hotel room, the weight of exhaustion finally taking hold. She sank onto the bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind swirling. The image of the fans cheering, the lights shining down on her, it all seemed so distant now. She could hear the echoes of the applause, but they felt empty, like distant thunder fading into nothing. She needed a change. She needed to breathe. And for the first time in a long time, Clara made a decision, not to perform for anyone, but for herself. She was going to take a break. The next morning, Clara texted both Rachel and Emma, telling them she was going to step away from the upcoming shows. She needed to find herself again, to reconnect with her purpose, and to heal. The silence from her phone was deafening, but deep down, Clara knew it was the right choice. Rachel's response came an hour later, terse but not entirely unsupportive. "I understand. But this is a big risk, Clara. You're at the height of your career right now. You're making waves. Don't throw it all away. Clara stared at the message for a while, reading it over and over. She had worked so hard to get here, but in her heart, she knew Rachel was wrong. This wasn't a risk. This was survival. Emma's message came soon after, "I'm glad you're doing this. Take care of yourself, Clara. No matter what happens, you've got me." Clara smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. Emma had always been there for her, no matter how far the distance between them. Clara put the phone down and walked over to the window, pulling open the blinds. The sunlight streamed in, warming her face. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight in her chest ease for the first time in weeks. She wasn't sure where she would go from here, but she knew one thing: she needed to find the part of herself she had lost somewhere along the way. Clara spent the next week in complete solitude. She turned off her phone and stayed away from the distractions of the outside world. She spent the days in quiet reflection, walking through the city parks, reading old journals, and listening to the kind of music that used to inspire her, songs that weren't meant to impress anyone, but simply to move her. One afternoon, as Clara walked through a small park near her hotel, she found a bench by a lake. The weather was perfect, warm but not too hot, with a gentle breeze rustling the trees. She sat down and closed her eyes, letting the sounds of the world around her fill her senses. For the first time in what felt like forever, Clara allowed herself to just be. She wasn't a singer, a performer, or a product. She was just Clara, someone who loved music and had lost her way. Her mind wandered back to her childhood, to the days when singing had been pure. It wasn't about hitting the right notes or getting the crowd's approval. It was about joy, freedom, and connection to something bigger than herself. She remembered singing in church, with her mother beside her, the feeling of the music moving through her like a force she couldn't control. She remembered her dreams of making it big, of sharing her voice with the world, but she also remembered the joy she felt before it all became a battle. That day by the lake, Clara made a promise to herself. She wouldn't return to the stage until she had rediscovered that joy. Until she could sing for herself again, and not just for others. Back in the hotel room, Clara began to journal again, something she hadn't done in years. She wrote about her fears, her hopes, and the emptiness that had crept into her soul. But she also wrote about her dreams, dreams that had been buried under the weight of expectations. She poured her heart onto the pages, the ink a release for the pain and confusion she had been holding in for so long. And through the process, she felt a shift. It wasn't instant, but it was real. She could feel the fog beginning to lift, and for the first time in a long time, she started to understand what was truly important. Meanwhile, back in the industry, Rachel and Emma had been busy with their own agendas. Rachel was doing what she could to keep Clara's career alive while she was on break. She had begun reaching out to potential new partners, talking to producers about upcoming projects, and trying to line up the next big opportunity. Emma, on the other hand, had been more concerned with Clara's well-being. She reached out to Clara's family, trying to ensure that the support system around her was strong. Emma knew that Clara had always been resilient, but the industry had a way of chewing people up and spitting them out. She didn't want that to happen to her friend. By the end of the week, Clara felt lighter. Her voice still felt tired, but she could feel the first stirrings of her passion returning. She didn't know what the future held, whether she would return to the stage or continue with the next phase of her life, but she knew that she couldn't keep living under the pressure she had been. As Clara sat at her desk, looking out at the city skyline, she allowed herself to dream again. She didn't have to chase fame or success. She didn't have to prove anything to anyone. She could make music again, but this time, it would be for herself. It would be real, and it would be honest. She was going to take her time, learn to love the art again, and find the peace she had been searching for. Clara smiled softly to herself. She wasn't broken. She was just beginning again. The next morning, Clara called Emma. "I think I'm ready," Clara said, her voice full of newfound conviction. "I'm ready to figure out what's next. Emma's voice was warm and relieved. "Take it slow, Clara. Do it your way this time. There's no rush." Clara took a deep breath, the uncertainty still there, but it wasn't as overwhelming now. She had the time she needed. And this time, she would make sure her journey was hers to control. "I'm ready to sing for myself, Emma. And when I'm ready, I'll share it with the world." Clara's decision to step away from the stage felt like both a release and a challenge. She had always prided herself on her resilience, her ability to endure, but now she realized that endurance wasn't enough. She had to rediscover her passion, the very thing that had ignited her dream of becoming a singer in the first place. It wasn't long before she began taking small steps toward that rediscovery. She no longer spent her days in the hustle of rehearsals or the rush of the spotlight. Instead, Clara allowed herself time to reflect, to listen to the music that had once filled her with purpose. She found solace in simpler things, taking long walks through the city streets, listening to vinyl records at home, sitting quietly in the park. The constant noise of the music industry had drowned out the sound of her own voice, but now, for the first time in years, she could hear it clearly again. One evening, Clara found herself sitting on the rooftop of her hotel. The city sprawled beneath her, the bright lights casting a soft glow over the streets. The hum of traffic, the distant chatter of the nightlife, and the rustling of the wind created a soothing background, but it was the silence within her that captivated Clara. She had been searching for meaning in the noise, but now she realized that the answers she was looking for were in the stillness. For the first time in months, Clara let herself breathe. No schedule, no deadlines, no performances to prepare for. Just her, alone with her thoughts and the evening sky. She pulled out her phone and sent a message to Emma, "I think I want to write music again. Not for anyone else, just for me." The reply came almost immediately, "I'm so proud of you, Clara. Take your time. You've earned it." Clara smiled, feeling the warmth of Emma's words wrap around her. She wasn't alone. The next day, Clara ventured to a small recording studio that she had heard about from a friend. It wasn't the glamorous, high-tech studio she was used to, but something about its simplicity appealed to her. It felt like a place where she could reconnect with the music, without the distractions of fame or industry pressure. The owner of the studio, a man named Luke, welcomed her with a warm handshake. He was in his late 30s, with a scruffy beard and an easygoing demeanor. There was something about him that made Clara feel at ease, something that reminded her of the early days when music had been her escape, not her job. "So, what brings you to my humble little studio?" Luke asked as they walked through the cramped hallway toward the recording room. "I just need a place to think. To write, really," Clara replied, glancing around. The walls were lined with old posters, records, and instruments. It was a far cry from the pristine, commercial studios she was used to, and that made her feel like she had stumbled upon something genuine. Luke smiled. "Well, you've come to the right place. There's no pressure here, just music. Let's get you set up." Clara spent the next few hours in the studio, strumming a guitar she had found in the corner. She hadn't played in so long, but as her fingers brushed against the strings, memories began flooding back, of sitting on the porch with her father, of singing along to old blues records in the kitchen with her mother. The music had always been there, even when she had forgotten about it. She started writing lyrics, simple words at first, but soon the song began to take shape. It wasn't anything complicated or flashy, but it was honest. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt a connection to her craft that wasn't motivated by industry expectations or the pressure of being perfect. It was raw and vulnerable, and it felt like a breakthrough. As the evening sun began to set, Clara sat back in her chair, staring at the unfinished song in front of her. She hadn't written a song like this in years. It wasn't for anyone. It was just for her, a way to express the emotions she had buried for so long. The next few days were filled with more writing, more experimenting with sounds, and more reflection. Clara allowed herself to explore the music without rushing it, without the constraints of deadlines or industry demands. She had time, and that was something she had never given herself before. Every day, she would return to the studio, and every day, the music began to flow more freely. She would play the guitar, experiment with different melodies, and write lyrics that came from the heart. Sometimes the words didn't make sense, but Clara didn't mind. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being true. One evening, after another productive session in the studio, Clara sat outside on the steps, her phone in her hand. She stared at the message from Rachel that had been sitting there for days, unread. "Clara, I've been trying to reach you. I know you're taking a break, but we need to talk about your career. The next tour is coming up, and I've got big plans for you. You can't just disappear like this. You're too important." Clara took a deep breath and placed the phone in her bag. She knew that she would have to face Rachel eventually, but right now, she didn't feel ready. She wasn't ready to jump back into the cycle of expectations, of being a product rather than an artist. Not yet. But there was something else she knew now. She couldn't let Rachel's demands control her life anymore. She had spent too many years chasing someone else's idea of success. Now, it was time for Clara to define success for herself. A few days later, Clara invited Mia to the studio. Mia had been worried about Clara's decision to take a break, but when she arrived at the studio and saw Clara at ease, with music flowing effortlessly from her, she finally understood. "I've missed this," Clara said, smiling as she played a few chords on the guitar. "I've missed just making music for the sake of making it. It feels good." Mia sat down across from her, a quiet smile on her face. "I'm so proud of you, Clara. You've been chasing someone else's dream for so long, and now you're chasing your own. That's amazing." Clara nodded, looking down at the guitar in her hands. "I feel like I'm finally starting to find myself again. I don't know what's next, but for the first time in a long time, I'm okay with that." The two of them sat in silence, the music playing softly in the background. Clara wasn't sure where her journey would take her, but she knew one thing for certain: this time, she would be the one to decide her path. Later that night, Clara returned to her hotel, the glow of the city lights outside her window casting a soft shadow on the walls. She sat down at the desk, pulled out her notebook, and began to write. The words came slowly at first, but as her thoughts poured out onto the page, they began to take shape. It was a song for herself. The melody was simple, the lyrics raw, but it felt like the beginning of something new. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As Clara continued to work in the studio, the world outside her bubble seemed to keep spinning at a pace she couldn't control. Even though she had made the decision to step away, she still felt the invisible pull of her career, the people who depended on her, and the audience who saw her as nothing more than a commodity. Each morning, when she checked her phone, there were messages from Rachel, from her manager, from reporters asking when she would return to the stage. Clara had avoided answering most of them, but the weight of those expectations sat heavy on her chest. No matter how much time she spent in the studio, no matter how much music she poured her heart into, there was always the looming reminder that she was, to many, nothing more than a performer. A brand. A symbol of something bigger than herself. And that thought scared her. It was a Sunday afternoon when Rachel's call came through. Clara hesitated for a moment before answering, knowing that this conversation would be difficult. "Clara," Rachel's voice came through, crisp and direct. "We need to talk." Clara bit her lip, leaning back against the couch in the studio lounge. She glanced around, taking in the familiar surroundings, the soft hum of the studio, the comforting smell of old leather chairs and vintage instruments. For a brief moment, it felt like her sanctuary. But the world outside was a reminder that she couldn't hide forever. "I know," Clara replied. I've been meaning to call you. I've been patient with you, Clara. You've been gone for weeks now, and there's been no word. People are starting to ask questions. You're under contract. There are obligations you can't just ignore. Clara's stomach twisted. She knew where this was headed. I've been thinking a lot, Rachel, she began, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. And I've come to the conclusion that I need a break. I'm not sure how long it will be, but I can't keep going like this. Not for now. Rachel's sigh was audible, a mixture of frustration and concern. Clara, I understand that you need time, but this isn't just about you anymore. This is your career, and you have commitments. The fans are waiting. The tours are planned. You're one of the biggest names right now, and you're throwing it all away. Do you realize what this could do? Clara clenched her jaw, a sense of calm spreading over her as she replied, I've realized that I've been living for other people's expectations, Rachel. I don't want to keep doing that. Not anymore. I need to remember why I started this in the first place. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Clara could almost hear Rachel's brain working overtime, trying to process her words. Clara, Rachel's voice softened, but there was an edge to it now. You're not just letting yourself down. You're letting everyone down. We all depend on you. I know, Rachel. And I'm not trying to hurt anyone, but I can't keep pretending. I'm doing this for me, even if it means disappointing some people. There was another long pause, but finally Rachel spoke again, quieter this time, almost resigned. I'll give you your space, Clara. But this won't be easy. Just remember, there are people who are counting on you. Clara's heart sank. She had known the conversation wouldn't be easy, but hearing Rachel's disappointment hit her harder than she expected. Thank you, Rachel, Clara said, her voice soft, but firm. I promise I'll figure this out. I need time. After hanging up, Clara sat in silence, the weight of the conversation settling over her like a heavy fog. She had made her decision, but she didn't feel the relief she thought she would. Instead, she felt the familiar pressure of the expectations that had followed her for so long. She needed to ground herself again, find a place of peace before she could make any further decisions. And so, Clara decided to take a different approach. Over the next week, Clara spent more time away from the studio. She sought out nature, visiting a small cabin by a lake in the countryside, a far cry from the neon lights and crowded streets of her usual life. Here, she could breathe deeply and allow herself the time to think without distractions. The calm of the water, the rustling trees, and the quiet of the world around her helped Clara begin to sift through her emotions. The pressure, the exhaustion, the feelings of being misunderstood, they all started to rise to the surface. And with each passing day, Clara felt her old passion stirring again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't about impressing others, it wasn't about being perfect. It was about finding her authentic self and letting that self shine through the music. It was during one of these quiet afternoons, as Clara sat on the porch with a guitar in hand, that she felt a shift within herself. She began to write, the words flowing from her like a river. The song was raw, emotional, and full of truth. She sang of loss, of rediscovery, of stepping away from what was expected of her. She sang about freedom, freedom from expectations, from the need to constantly perform, to prove herself. And as the final note lingered in the cool evening air, Clara realized something. She was ready. She was ready to share her journey with the world. But this time, it would be her truth, her story, not the one the world had written for her. Back in the city, as Clara prepared to return to her life in the spotlight, she knew she had to face her fears. There was still a part of her that felt the weight of those expectations pressing down on her shoulders. But now, she was prepared to carry them in her own way. She wouldn't be a puppet to the industry anymore. She would control her own narrative, and she would do it on her own terms. One evening, she called Emma, who had been keeping in touch with Clara throughout her time away. "Emma," Clara said, her voice calm but full of emotion. "I'm ready to return. But this time, I'm doing it for me. No more pretending." Emma's voice cracked with emotion. "Clara, I'm so proud of you. You found your way back." Clara smiled softly, staring out over the city skyline. "I'm not sure what's next, but I know it's going to be real." With the song she had written in hand, Clara returned to the studio, her heart light and her spirit stronger. This would be the beginning of a new chapter, one where she could finally step into the light, not as a performer molded by others, but as an artist who had learned to trust herself again. As the first note of her new song filled the room, Clara felt the weight of the world lifting off her shoulders. She was ready to sing again, not for anyone else, but for herself. The studio lights flickered as Clara settled in front of the microphone. The room, once filled with the frenetic energy of performances and industry demands, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where she could finally breathe and create without constraints. She had made her decision to take back control of her life and career, but there was one more thing left to do. She had to face the world again, not as the artist they thought they knew, but as the person she was becoming. For weeks, Clara had been working on new music, songs that were intimate, vulnerable, and most importantly, true to who she was. She had stopped worrying about what the industry wanted, what the fans expected. It wasn't about fame or accolades anymore. It was about rediscovering her voice and sharing it in its rawest form. Tonight, she would record the first track of her new journey. The engineer, a quiet young man named Daniel, gave her an encouraging nod as Clara took a deep breath. She had been in countless studios before, but tonight was different. Tonight, she wasn't just a performer, she was a storyteller, sharing her own truth. Clara strummed the opening chords of her guitar and let the music fill the room. The familiar feeling of the guitar against her fingers, the simple rhythm, was grounding. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was fighting against something. She was simply existing in the moment. As she began to sing, her voice felt like an extension of herself, stronger, more confident than it had been in years. The lyrics were simple, but each word carried weight. The song was about letting go, finding freedom, and embracing who she truly was, flaws and all. The music flowed effortlessly, and Clara felt the release she had been seeking for so long. This was her, and she was not going to apologize for it. Daniel sat behind the glass, nodding his approval. He had seen countless artists come and go, each with their own baggage, their own struggles. But there was something different about Clara. She wasn't just singing a song, she was living it. When the last note of the song faded, Clara opened her eyes, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was being judged. She was simply expressing herself, and that was enough. "That was amazing," Daniel said, his voice breaking the silence. "You've really found your voice again." Clara smiled softly, a mixture of relief and pride in her eyes. "It feels good. I think this is what I've been missing all along." Later that evening, after the recording was complete, Clara sat on the steps of the studio, staring up at the night sky. She had done it. She had faced her fears, confronted the pressure to be someone she wasn't, and rediscovered her passion for music. But there was still one last obstacle to overcome. She had to decide what to do next. The industry was waiting for her return, but Clara knew that if she stepped back into the spotlight, it couldn't be the same. She wasn't ready to dive back into the whirlwind of tours, interviews, and public appearances. Not yet, at least. Clara pulled out her phone and scrolled through the messages that had piled up in her inbox. Rachel's messages were still there, unanswered. A few were polite, others more insistent, urging Clara to come back and finish what she had started. Clara stared at the screen for a long moment before typing a response. "I'm not ready to come back yet. I need more time. But I'm working on something. Something that feels right." She hit send, feeling the weight of that decision settle in her chest. It was the truth, the only truth she could offer at that moment. She couldn't go back to who she was before, no matter how much the world expected it. This time, she was going to do things her way. The next morning, Clara woke up early. There was something about the quiet hours before the city came alive that she had grown to cherish. She had spent so much of her life running, chasing dreams, running from fears, and ultimately losing herself in the process. But now, she had a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She spent the morning working on new songs, piecing together the music that had been swirling in her mind. The melodies were soft and reflective, but there was an undeniable strength in them. Clara wasn't sure what the next step would be, but she knew one thing: she was going to take her time. She wasn't going to let anyone else dictate her pace. As the week wore on, Clara continued to record and write, each session bringing her closer to a deeper understanding of who she was as an artist. The sound was evolving, much like she was. It was soulful and raw, unfiltered. And with every note, Clara realized that this was the kind of music she had always wanted to create, music that spoke to the heart, that captured the complexity of human experience. At the same time, she was more determined than ever to protect her space, to guard the sense of freedom she had fought so hard to reclaim. She knew that as soon as she returned to the public eye, the expectations would come rushing back: interviews, photo shoots, endless demands from record labels and promoters. But this time, she wasn't afraid to say no. For once, Clara was in control of her own story. 2 weeks later, Clara called Emma. The conversation had been long overdue, but Clara wasn't sure how to explain what she had been doing. How could she share her journey of self-discovery without sounding like she was running away from everything? But Emma had always been supportive, and Clara knew she could trust her. "Clara," Emma said after listening patiently. "I'm so proud of you. I know how hard this has been for you, but you're doing the right thing. You're not just finding your voice again, you're finding yourself." Clara felt tears prick her eyes as she smiled. "I don't know what's next, Emma. But I'm finally okay with that. I don't need to have all the answers anymore." Emma laughed softly. "That's the most freeing thing you can say, Clara. I know you'll figure it out. And when you're ready, the world will be waiting for you. But only when you're ready. Don't let anyone rush you." That evening, as Clara sat by the window with a cup of tea, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Rachel. "Clara, I respect your decision to take time for yourself, but we need to talk soon. The industry is moving on, and your fans are waiting. Don't leave them hanging." Clara stared at the message for a long time, feeling a familiar weight in her chest. But this time, she didn't feel the pressure to respond immediately. She had made her decision, and she was not going to let fear or guilt push her back into something she wasn't ready for. She typed a response: "I'll be in touch when I'm ready. Thank you for understanding." It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. Clara was taking control of her journey, one that was finally hers to shape. As she put the phone down and gazed out at the city lights, Clara felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, she was ready to walk it on her own terms. It had been a month since Clara had made her decision to step away from the spotlight. The initial silence from her fans and the industry had been deafening, but it gave her the space she desperately needed. She no longer felt trapped in a cycle of performance and expectation. In the stillness, she had rediscovered herself. But the quiet had also led to something else: a yearning for connection. For validation, not from the crowd or the media, but from the people who mattered most. Clara knew she couldn't stay in isolation forever. Eventually, she would need to return, to share her new music, her new self, with the world. But it was clear to her now that this time, the return would be different. This time, she would control her narrative. One afternoon, Clara sat in her living room with a fresh cup of coffee, her fingers hovering over her laptop. The screen was filled with notifications, messages from her manager, Rachel, her record label, and, unexpectedly, her fans. The messages were a mixture of concern and excitement. Some were begging for her return, while others expressed worry for her well-being. But beneath all the noise, Clara saw something new. There was an understanding growing among her followers. They had begun to accept that she needed time. It wasn't just about her career anymore. It was about her mental health, her heart, and her soul. And in that moment, Clara made a decision. She would use her voice in a new way. Not just through her music, but through her words. Clara opened her social media account, something she had been hesitant to do after her time away. The online world could be overwhelming, and she wasn't sure how to re-enter it without feeling like she was being pulled back into the chaos. But she knew it was time to speak her truth. She typed slowly, carefully crafting the message she wanted to send. To my fans, my supporters, and anyone who has ever believed in me. I've taken some time away to reflect and heal. This journey hasn't been easy, but it has been necessary. I've realized that I've been chasing something outside of myself for so long, and I lost sight of who I am. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but I am asking for your understanding. Music is still my heart, but it will be on my terms. Thank you for your patience. The best is yet to come. She paused for a moment, rereading the message. It felt vulnerable, raw, but it felt right. She clicked post and closed the laptop. She didn't need to check for responses immediately. She had spoken her truth. It wasn't long before her inbox exploded. Messages flooded in, some supportive, others questioning, but most filled with love and understanding. Her fans had been waiting for her, and now they were hearing her. Clara knew that this was just the beginning. A few days later, Rachel called. Clara had been anticipating this call, but she wasn't sure what to expect. "Clara, I got your message," Rachel said, her voice a mixture of emotion and professionalism. "You've made it clear you're not ready to dive back in full force. And I respect that. But we need to talk about the next steps." Clara took a deep breath. "I know, Rachel. I'm still figuring it out, but I promise I'll be involved. Just not in the way I used to be." "I get that," Rachel replied, her tone softening. "But you have to understand, there's a balance. The world's waiting. People are expecting something from you, Clara. And the longer you wait, the more the industry will move on without you." Clara felt a pang of fear at the words, but she steadied herself. "I've spent my whole life worrying about what everyone else wants. Now, I want to make music for myself. When I'm ready to come back, I'll do it. But I need time to make sure I'm doing this for the right reasons." Rachel was quiet for a moment, processing Clara's words. Then she sighed. "I won't rush you, Clara. But you need to remember, you're one of the best. And the world will miss you if you don't share your gift. Just don't stay away too long. Take the time you need, but know that you have something important to offer." Clara nodded, even though Rachel couldn't see her. "I will. I promise." As the days went by, Clara continued to write. The songs came easily now, the melodies flowing from her in waves. She was no longer just writing for an audience, she was writing for herself, for the healing that had taken place inside her. The music was raw, vulnerable, and full of truth. It felt like she was finally writing the story she had been too afraid to tell. The second song she wrote became an anthem for her healing journey. It was about forgiveness, toward herself, toward the industry, and toward the people who had tried to define her. It was a declaration of independence, a promise to no longer be a puppet in a game she couldn't control. A month later, Clara was ready to return to the studio. But this time, things were different. She walked in with a new sense of confidence, not because she was ready to take over the charts again, but because she had found peace. The music she was about to create was not for the industry or the fans, it was for her. And if others loved it, then that would be a beautiful bonus. The producer, Tim, greeted her with a warm smile. "Clara, it's great to see you back. How are you feeling?" "I'm feeling good," she said, a quiet smile spreading across her face. "I'm feeling like I finally know who I am again." Tim raised an eyebrow. "Well, then let's make some music. Show me what you've got." Clara sat down at the piano, her fingers grazing the keys. She began to play, and the first notes of a new song filled the room. It was unlike anything she had done before, gentle, yet powerful. The lyrics were a prayer of sorts. A plea for strength, for courage, and for the wisdom to continue moving forward. As Clara sang the words, she felt a deep sense of purpose. She wasn't singing for fame. She wasn't singing for approval. She was singing because it was who she was. Weeks passed, and Clara continued to record, each song more personal than the last. With each note, she could feel herself shedding old layers of doubt and fear. She was finally allowing herself to be vulnerable, to let her voice be heard not just as a performer, but as a woman who had gone through struggle and come out stronger on the other side. The final product was nothing short of magic. The album was a journey, one that reflected Clara's growth, her struggles, and her newfound sense of self. She had crafted something truly special, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid to share it with the world. When the album was ready for release, Clara stood at the edge of a new chapter. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that whatever came next, it would be on her terms. And that, for the first time in her life, felt like freedom. The first few days after Clara released her new music were overwhelming. The flood of messages, both from fans and the media, was nearly as intense as it had been when she first entered the industry. The difference now, however, was how she approached it. There was no rush, no anxiety about how the world would receive her work. Clara had done the work on herself first. She knew that, no matter the reaction, this was her truth, and that was enough. Her inbox was full of support, but there was also a sharp criticism from some parts of the media. The headlines screamed, "Clara Davis, is she trying to make a comeback or just playing the victim?" And, after a year of silence, Clara's new music is a reflection of her struggle. Some called it brave, others called it self-indulgent. But Clara had grown beyond letting the critics define her worth. One afternoon, as Clara sat on her balcony, sipping a cup of tea, she saw a notification from her manager Rachel pop up on her phone. It wasn't unusual for Rachel to be in touch after a release, but Clara could tell from the message preview that this was more urgent. "Clara, we need to talk. There's been some major interest from a few big outlets, and we should schedule interviews. You can control the narrative now, but you need to decide if you want to go public about your hiatus and the personal growth journey you've been on." Clara stared at the screen. She had been avoiding public appearances for so long, terrified of what it would mean to expose the real Clara Davis to the world. But now that the music was out there, the world would want answers. They wanted to know why she had disappeared. Why she was choosing now to return. And more than that, they wanted her to play by the industry's rules. Her fingers hovered over the phone screen as she typed a response. "I'll be ready. Let's talk tomorrow." She knew it was time. Time to stand tall in her truth, no matter the consequences. The next day, Clara sat across from Rachel in a small cafe near her apartment. Rachel had her laptop open in front of her, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she went over a series of interview requests and potential talking points. "You've got a lot of people interested," Rachel said, tapping the screen. "I think it's time to take control of your story, Clara. You've got the power to reshape everything." Clara nodded, but a small flicker of doubt lingered in her chest. "I'm not sure I can go back to that world, Rachel. The one where every word, every move, is analyzed. The world where people want to see you break." Rachel met her gaze, her eyes softening. "I get it. It's hard. But here's the thing, you're not the same person you were when you first entered the industry. And the world doesn't get to define you anymore. This is your moment to show them who you really are. Clara leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath. The weight of Rachel's words settled into her bones. This wasn't about coming back to reclaim fame. This wasn't about proving anything to the people who had doubted her. This was about claiming her narrative, about sharing her story the way it had always meant to be told. A week later, Clara sat in a plush studio surrounded by cameras, microphones, and bright lights. She had agreed to a major interview with a popular media outlet, one that reached millions of viewers. She had been carefully coached, not just on her music but also on how to address the personal aspects of her hiatus. But Clara knew deep down that the only way to do this right was to speak from the heart. The host, a charismatic woman named Lena, smiled as the cameras began to roll. "Clara, welcome. It's been a long time since we've seen you in the public eye. How does it feel to be back?" Clara smiled softly, but her eyes reflected a quiet strength. "It feels like I'm finally home. In a way, I never really left. But this time, I'm not coming back as the same person. I've learned a lot about myself, about who I am, and what music really means to me." Lena nodded, her expression warm. "That's what we've all been wondering. You disappeared for a while. There were rumors about mental health struggles, about pressure from the industry, and some people even thought you might be done with music. What made you come back?" Clara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. "It wasn't really about disappearing. It was more about finding myself. I had lost my way for a while. I was trying to be everything for everyone else, and I forgot what made me happy. Music is my passion, but I needed to rediscover why I love it. So, I took the time to step away, to heal, to really understand who I was outside of the pressure to perform." Lena leaned forward slightly, her voice softer now. "That's a beautiful thing. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. But how did you get from there to the music we're hearing now? What was the turning point?" Clara's eyes softened, and she took another breath. "I realized that I had been letting fear control me for far too long. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, and even fear of success. The turning point came when I allowed myself to be vulnerable. I wrote the music for myself first. And that's how I found my voice again." As the interview went on, Clara found herself opening up more than she had anticipated. She spoke about the darkness she had struggled with, the moments when she wanted to walk away from it all, and the epiphany that came when she stopped trying to be perfect. She talked about the importance of authenticity, of being true to oneself, even when the world demands otherwise. By the time the interview wrapped up, Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had shared her story, not just for the audience, but for herself. The weight that had held her down for so long had been lifted, if only for a moment. In the days that followed, Clara's interview went viral. People from all walks of life reached out to her, sharing their own stories of self-discovery and resilience. Fans who had been following her for years felt like they knew her in a way they never had before. And even the media, which had once been quick to judge her, seemed to respect her journey. But Clara knew there was still much to do. She had taken the first step, but the road ahead was long. There would be more interviews, more songs, and more decisions to make. But for the first time in her career, she didn't feel like she was walking that road alone. She was walking it as herself. Late one evening, Clara sat in her studio, her guitar resting on her lap. She had been working on a new song, one that reflected everything she had been through in the past year. The lyrics were simple but powerful, a declaration of independence, of strength, and of embracing her imperfections. It was the final track for the album, the one that would close this chapter of her life. As she strummed the final chords, she knew this was it, the moment where she would finally share her truth with the world. The road to redemption was not an easy one, but Clara had walked it. And now, she was ready to let her music speak for itself. Clara's album had been out for 2 weeks, and the response was overwhelming. much more positive than she had ever imagined. The tracks resonated with her fans in ways she hadn't expected, and the media, though still skeptical, couldn't deny the authenticity in her voice. For the first time, Clara felt like she wasn't just performing to an audience, she was sharing a part of herself that had been hidden for so long. Despite this success, the media still wanted to keep her in a box, and the pressure was beginning to mount. Clara had learned how to silence the loudest voices in her head, but she couldn't entirely shut out the clamor of expectations. She had gained back control over her music, but the question remained, could she maintain control over the parts of her life that everyone wanted to know about? It was another early morning when Clara received an unexpected call from her publicist, James. He was one of the few people in her life who had stuck with her during her hiatus and had been advocating for her to take back control of her career in a way that felt authentic. "Clara, we've got another offer. This one is big," James said. "It's a TV appearance on The Tonight Show. They want you on, and they want you to talk about the new album, what it means, why you made it, and what's next for you. It's a prime opportunity, but I need to know if you're comfortable with this. It's your choice." Clara felt her stomach tighten. She hadn't planned to return to full-blown media exposure just yet. The thought of sitting in front of millions of people, answering questions about her private struggles, made her uneasy. The music was personal, but the public, especially television audiences, could be intrusive. They wanted more than just the music, they wanted the story. "I'm not sure," Clara replied honestly. "I don't want to do this just for the sake of publicity. The music speaks for itself, right?" James' voice softened. "It does. But this is also an opportunity to show people who you really are. You've always let the media define you, Clara. You have the power now to redefine yourself. It's not about putting on a show, it's about taking control of your story. Just think about it." Clara stood up, walking over to the window as she gazed out at the city. The thought of stepping back into the limelight filled her with both excitement and dread. But James was right. The music was just the beginning. She had already taken one huge step by sharing her story through the album. Now, it was time to do it live. Later that week, Clara found herself backstage at The Tonight Show, her palms sweating slightly, but her resolve stronger than ever. She had spent the past few days preparing herself for the inevitable questions about her hiatus, the pressures of the industry, and her journey. She knew that the conversation could easily stray into uncomfortable territory, but she also knew that she could navigate it with grace. This wasn't about protecting her image, it was about speaking her truth. The makeup artist finished applying the final touches, and Clara's reflection in the mirror stared back at her. She looked different, more grounded, more confident. For the first time in years, she didn't need to hide behind a smile or a mask. She was ready to step out there as herself. The stage lights were bright, and the audience's energy was palpable. As Clara stepped onto the stage, she felt a wave of nerves, but she fought them off with a deep breath. Jimmy Fallon greeted her with a warm smile and a hug, and for a moment, the tension lifted. "Clara, it's so good to have you here," Jimmy said, his enthusiasm infectious. "I have to say, your new album is incredible. It's raw, it's real, and it's really been resonating with people. But tell me, what made you decide now was the right time to come back?" Clara smiled, taking a seat next to him. "Thanks, Jimmy. It's been a long journey. I think the album was born out of me finally listening to myself, really hearing my own voice. I was always so focused on what others expected of me that I lost sight of why I started making music in the first place. So, when I took time off, I didn't just take a break. I had to reconnect with who I was outside of the industry. And when I came back, I was finally ready to share that part of me." Jimmy leaned in, his eyes curious. "You talk about taking time off, was it because of the pressures of fame? Mental health struggles?" Clara hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Yes, it was a lot of things. The pressure to always be on, the constant scrutiny, it became overwhelming. I lost myself in trying to meet everyone else's expectations, and I forgot to take care of myself. But I'm in a much better place now. The time I took to step away helped me find peace, and it allowed me to rediscover my love for music without all the external noise. There was a brief pause, and the audience seemed to absorb her words. Clara could feel the weight of the conversation, but she didn't shrink from it. This was her story, and she was owning it. She was no longer just the girl the world had built up, she was Clara Davis, in control of her narrative. The conversation shifted to her music, and Clara began talking about the stories behind the songs on her album. She spoke passionately about the creative process, about how she wrote from a place of vulnerability and honesty. The audience responded positively, their applause affirming that Clara was, indeed, making an impact. As the interview wrapped up, Jimmy looked at her with a smile. "Clara, you've always been one of the best talents out there, and now it's clear you found something even more important, yourself. We're so glad you're back." Clara felt a lump form in her throat, but she held it together. "Thanks, Jimmy. It means the world to me to be here, to be able to talk about this. Music is my gift to the world, but now, I'm finally making it for me." The next few days felt like a whirlwind. Clara's appearance on The Tonight Show was everywhere, from online articles to social media posts. It wasn't just her music people were talking about anymore, it was her transformation, her willingness to be vulnerable, to reclaim her power. She had stepped into the spotlight, not as a star or a performer, but as a woman who had lived through struggles and come out stronger. The response from her fans was overwhelming. They sent her messages of love and support, sharing their own stories of overcoming hardships. Clara had given them permission to be themselves, just as she had done for herself. For the first time in years, Clara felt free. But despite the success and the praise, Clara knew the real work was still ahead. The industry was watching, waiting to see if her new path would hold. Would they respect her decisions, or would they demand that she fall back into the familiar role they had cast her in? But Clara was ready. This time, she wasn't afraid of the spotlight. She had learned that the true power didn't come from the attention of others, it came from within. She was on her own terms now. Clara sat in the quiet of her studio, a soft evening light filtering through the windows, casting long shadows over the room. The past few weeks had been a blur of interviews, performances, and discussions about her future. As much as the newfound attention had been validating, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at a crossroads. The music industry, the media, and her fans were all watching her closely, but Clara knew that her true test wasn't about meeting anyone else's expectations. It was about finding peace within herself and maintaining the authenticity that had gotten her here in the first place. After the success of The Tonight Show interview, she had received offers for more appearances, more interviews, and more opportunities to expand her reach. But Clara wasn't sure how much of that world she wanted to dive back into. The fame, the constant public scrutiny, it had taken a toll on her before, and though she felt stronger now, the fear of slipping back into old patterns lingered. One afternoon, as Clara was scrolling through her social media accounts, she came across a message that caught her attention. It was from a fan who had followed her journey for years. The message was simple but heartfelt. "Clara, your music has helped me find my voice, too. You gave me permission to stop pretending and to start living for myself. Thank you for sharing your story." Reading it, Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so many years hiding her true self, but now, by sharing her struggles and triumphs, she had unknowingly helped others do the same. The weight of that realization hit her in a way she hadn't anticipated. Maybe it was time to focus on the things that truly mattered, her music, her healing, and her connection with the people who truly understood her. The following week, Clara made a decision. She would take a step back from the constant media cycle for a while and focus on something that had always been her passion, creating music. But this time, it would be different. She wasn't going to chase charts, or try to please the industry. She was going to make the music that came from her heart, from her soul, without fear, without pressure. She sent a message to her manager, Rachel, letting her know she wanted to focus on writing new songs and working on a new project. Rachel was supportive, as always, but Clara could sense the hesitation in her response. It wasn't that Rachel didn't understand, it was that the music industry thrived on momentum, and Clara had just built up significant buzz. Stepping away might seem like a risky move, especially when she had a platform that so many artists would kill for. But Clara knew it was the right decision for her. She spent the next few weeks holed up in her studio, writing songs late into the night. Her process was different this time. There was no rush, no deadline. The songs came to her naturally, pouring out of her like they had been waiting to be heard. Each track was a reflection of the person she had become, stronger, more self-aware, and more determined than ever to live her truth. It was late one night, as Clara was putting the finishing touches on a new song, that her phone buzzed. It was a message from her sister, Ava, one of the few people Clara had always turned to for advice. "Clara, I've been thinking about you a lot lately. How are you really doing? I know the music is great, but I worry about you. Promise me you'll take care of yourself." Clara smiled softly, touched by her sister's concern. She knew that Ava, who had always been her anchor, could sense the weight she was carrying, even if it wasn't obvious to anyone else. Clara paused, letting the words sink in. She hadn't been taking care of herself in the way she needed to, not fully. She had been so focused on her career, on making sure the world saw her as strong and capable, that she had neglected the small, everyday acts of self-care that kept her grounded. It was then that Clara made another decision. She would take time for herself, away from the cameras, away from the pressures of the industry. She would reconnect with the things that made her happy, without the lens of expectation hovering over her. And maybe, just maybe, she would find a way to finally let go of the fears that had haunted her for so long. Clara reached out to Rachel the next morning and told her that she wanted to take a brief hiatus from everything, the media, the interviews, the performances. Rachel, though initially resistant, understood. "If anyone can handle this and come back stronger, it's you, Clara," she said, after a long pause. "I'll support whatever you need." The decision felt like a weight lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt a sense of relief. She wasn't running away from her career, but rather taking a step back to recharge, to refocus, and to live on her own terms. A few days later, Clara took a flight to a remote cabin in the mountains, a place she had visited once before during a difficult period of her life. It was peaceful there, surrounded by nature, far away from the hustle and bustle of city life. She wasn't sure how long she would stay, but she didn't have to. The beauty of the cabin was in its simplicity. It was a space where she could breathe, think, and find clarity. As she sat on the porch that evening, a cup of tea in hand, Clara thought about everything she had been through. The years of struggle, the moments of doubt, the pressure to fit into a mold that had never suited her. But now, she was learning to embrace all of it, her past, her journey, her music, and trust that it would all lead her to where she needed to be. She closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of the wind rustling through the trees. She could hear her heartbeat, steady and calm. She wasn't alone anymore. She had found peace, not in the applause or the fame, but in herself. The days that followed were filled with quiet reflection. Clara took long walks through the woods, wrote in her journal, and allowed herself the space to just be. She hadn't realized how much she had needed this time, how much she had neglected her own well-being in the midst of everything. One afternoon, Clara took out her guitar and strummed a few chords, letting the music flow. It wasn't about creating something for an audience, it was just for her. And for the first time in a long time, Clara felt completely at peace. She was healing. And as she wrote the final verses to the song she had been working on, she realized that this was the beginning of something new, not just for her music, but for her life. She was ready for the next chapter. Not the one dictated by fame or expectations, but the one where she could live authentically, on her own terms. Clara had learned a valuable lesson: true strength wasn't about constantly pushing forward or performing for the world. It was about taking the time to heal, to step back, and to make sure that when you did step into the spotlight, it was because you were ready, because you were whole. And with that, Clara knew the road ahead would be hers to walk, at her own pace, in her own way. The mountains had given Clara everything she needed: clarity, peace, and time to reconnect with herself. But even as the days grew quieter, she could sense the pull of the world beyond her cabin, calling her back. The music industry, though not in the foreground of her life anymore, was always there, like a shadow she could never quite escape. People were still asking about her next move, still hoping for another hit, another album. But Clara knew that if she was going to truly step into the future she envisioned, she had to let go of the constant noise that came with the world of fame and expectations. She spent her days writing, painting, and sometimes sitting in silence, letting the thoughts come and go without trying to chase them. For once, she didn't feel the pressure to create something commercial, something for the charts or for validation. She created for herself. It was in one of those moments of stillness, as Clara sat by the fireplace one evening, that the phone call came. It was Rachel. "Clara, I've got some news. I didn't want to pressure you, but it's something you might want to think about," Rachel said, her voice tentative, but Clara could tell she had something important to say. Clara's pulse quickened slightly. The break had been so necessary, but the world still hadn't let go of her. "What's going on?" she asked, bracing herself. "It's a big tour offer, global. Top venues, festivals. You'd be headlining." Rachel paused, giving Clara a moment to process. "I know you've been on a break, but this could be the kind of thing that pushes you even further, if you want it." Clara stared at the flickering flames, the warm orange glow casting shadows on the walls of the cabin. Her first instinct was to reject the offer outright. The thought of returning to the grind of touring, the constant travel, the late nights, it was all too familiar. It had been part of the machine she had tried to escape. But then another thought crossed her mind: could this offer be a way to show the world who she truly was, not as the industry had built her, but as she had rebuilt herself? Could she reclaim her place on her own terms, with the strength and wisdom she had gained in her time away? Clara's mind raced, but her decision became clear. "Rachel, I'm not ready for that kind of commitment yet. I've just started finding my peace, and I don't want to lose it. I'll come back when I'm ready, but not now." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Then Rachel's voice softened. "I understand. Take your time, Clara. You'll know when it's the right moment." The next few days were a turning point for Clara. For the first time in years, she felt no need to prove herself. The music, her art, it was enough. It didn't matter if it wasn't at the top of the charts or in the headlines. It was hers, and that was what mattered most. But Clara also knew that there were parts of her life that needed closure. One of them was her relationship with the industry. It wasn't enough to just step away from it physically, she had to make peace with it emotionally, too. Clara called her manager and told her to set up a meeting with the label. The decision wasn't easy. But it felt like the right next step. A week later, Clara found herself walking through the sleek, modern offices of her record label. The atmosphere was professional, polished, yet impersonal. Clara had spent so many years in these halls, but now, they felt distant, like a part of a life she had outgrown. She wasn't the same person who had walked through these doors years ago. Back then, she had been desperate for approval, for validation. Now, she was focused on finding the best way to move forward, even if that meant stepping away from the expectations that had once defined her. She was greeted by a few familiar faces, including Peter, the label head who had been with her since the beginning. He shook her hand, his smile strained but polite. "Clara, we're happy to see you. I trust you're doing well." "I am," Clara said, her voice steady, but there was a tinge of sadness there. The truth was, she didn't want to be here, not like this. But it had to be done. I've been thinking about where I go from here. I know I've been quiet, but I've been doing a lot of reflection. Peter nodded. We've been watching your journey, Clara. It's clear you found a deeper place in your music. That's what we always wanted for you, but we have to ask, what's next for you? The fans are waiting. Clara hesitated. The words that had been swirling in her mind now came out slowly. I need a new kind of freedom, Peter. I'm not the same artist I was when we started. I'm not interested in being pushed for another hit, another album that fits into the mold. I need time to create, and to do that, I need space. I can't do this under the same conditions anymore. Peter's face fell slightly, but he recovered quickly. We understand, Clara. You've always been true to your craft, and I respect that. But I want to be clear, we've built a lot together. You've done well, but there are expectations. Our partnership. Clara cut him off gently. I know what it means. But it's time for me to move forward, in a way that feels right to me. I want to take control of my own journey. The room was quiet for a long moment. Peter's eyes narrowed slightly, but then he nodded slowly. I can't say I'm thrilled by the idea, Clara. But I respect your decision. We'll work with you on this transition, if that's what you want. Clara stood up, her heart pounding, but a strange sense of calm settled over her. This was it, the closure she needed. She wasn't running away from the industry, she was choosing to walk away on her own terms. I appreciate that, Clara said softly, giving him a final, respectful nod. I'm ready to find my own way now. As Clara walked out of the building, the city noise felt distant, muffled. She had finally done it. She had taken control, and now the weight that had been sitting heavy on her shoulders for so long had lifted. Her path was uncertain, but it was hers to define. No longer tethered by the expectations of others, Clara could move forward, not in the shadow of the past, but in the light of her own truth. For the first time in a long time, she felt completely free. That night, Clara sat at her cabin once more, the evening sky turning shades of purple and orange. She strummed her guitar softly, the familiar strings bringing her a sense of comfort. The words would come in time. For now, though, she was content to let the silence speak for her. Clara had always been one to question the purpose of her fame. She had never been in it for the glitz or the glamour, that had always felt like an afterthought to her. The music had always been the heart of it. But as she sat in the quiet of her cabin, thinking about the road ahead, she realized that the silence she had so desperately craved wasn't just about stepping away from the spotlight. It was about stepping into a new kind of existence, one that didn't rely on external validation. The industry was in the rearview now, and Clara was starting to understand that she was still just as much an artist in the quiet moments as she had been when she was standing on stage before thousands. The difference was that now, she could breathe. It had been 3 months since her meeting with the label, and Clara had spent that time in solitude, creating without the pressure of deadlines or expectations. But now, as she sat back, strumming a few notes, she felt an urge to share what she had written. Not for approval, but simply because it felt like the next step in her journey. She picked up her phone and sent a message to Rachel. I think I'm ready to share something. It's different from anything I've done before. No big reveal, no press tour, just music. Rachel responded almost immediately, Clara, I respect whatever you decide, but I think the world is ready for this version of you. Let's talk. Clara smiled at the response. It was always this easy with Rachel. She understood, respected her boundaries, and yet still believed in Clara's voice, no matter how quiet it might seem to the outside world. A few weeks later, Clara found herself standing in front of a microphone once more. This time, though, the atmosphere was entirely different. It was a small, intimate setting, a studio with just a few close friends and collaborators. No cameras, no bright lights, no red carpets. Just a space where Clara could be vulnerable without the world watching. The song she had written over the last few months was unlike anything she had ever produced. It wasn't about fame, or heartbreak, or chasing success. It was about reclaiming her own narrative, a declaration that she no longer needed anyone else's approval to be whole. It was a raw, stripped-down piece of music, just Clara, her guitar, and her voice. The recording process was simple, almost therapeutic. As Clara sang, she could feel the emotions pouring out of her, years of frustration, doubt, and hope all woven together in a melody that had taken on a life of its own. When the last note played and the final chord resonated through the studio, there was a moment of stunned silence. No one moved or said anything for a long time. It wasn't because they didn't know what to say, it was because the song had spoken for itself. Clara opened her eyes, looking at the small group of people gathered around. Her heart was pounding, but there was a feeling of accomplishment in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen. Not by an audience, not by the media, but by the people who cared enough to listen. That was, Rachel began, struggling to find the right words. Clara, that was something beyond music. Clara smiled faintly, still lost in the moment. It's just me. It's all I can give. A week after the recording, Clara made the decision to release the song. She wanted to keep it simple, organic. She wasn't going to perform it in arenas or plaster it on billboards. Instead, she would share it through the channels that meant the most to her, through social media, through her fans who had supported her from the beginning. No big marketing push, just a quiet release, the way it was always meant to be. The reaction was overwhelming, but not in the way Clara had imagined. There were no flashy headlines or trending topics. What Clara got were messages, personal stories from fans, telling her how the song had resonated with them. It wasn't just about the sound, it was about the honesty, the vulnerability, the truth of her journey. One message stood out to her more than the rest. It was from a young woman, struggling to find her place in the world. Clara, I've been struggling for so long. I've been told that my dreams are too big, that I'll never be enough. But your song reminded me that it's okay to not have everything figured out. It's okay to just be. Clara sat back as she read the message, the words sinking in. This was why she had shared the song, because it wasn't just her story. It was everyone's. And in that moment, she realized the true power of her music wasn't in the charts or in the fame. It was in the connection. A few months later, Clara sat in a cafe in New York City, looking out at the skyline as the world bustled around her. She hadn't been back to the city in a while, and as much as it felt like a different life, there was something comforting about being here again. She could walk down these streets without being swarmed, without the pressure of being the artist. She was just Clara, no more, no less. Her phone buzzed, and it was Rachel. Clara, you're trending. Clara raised an eyebrow and clicked on the message. Her song had slowly gained traction, picked up by fans, shared in personal playlists, and eventually made its way into wider circles. It wasn't a viral hit in the traditional sense, but it had found its audience, a genuine, heartfelt connection. People were drawn to it, not because of its commercial potential, but because of the raw truth it conveyed. Clara chuckled softly, shaking her head. I guess it's happening, she thought to herself. But the biggest surprise came when a producer from a major film studio reached out. He had heard the song and felt that it would be perfect for an upcoming project. Clara was hesitant. She had never imagined her music would be used for something like this, especially not in a way that felt so commercial. But then she listened to the pitch, and she realized something. This was her opportunity to reach an entirely new audience, in a way that aligned with her journey. She agreed to the offer, but only under the condition that her song would be used in the way she had intended, in its raw, unpolished form, just as it was. The song was released as part of the film's soundtrack, and soon, Clara found herself back in the limelight, but this time, it was on her terms. The media coverage, the interviews, the fans, it was all secondary to the real reason she had returned. To keep creating music that spoke to people. To share the piece of herself that had always been there, even when she was afraid to show it. As the year came to a close, Clara sat in her cabin once more, reflecting on everything that had happened. She had taken control of her journey, turned away from the expectations that had once consumed her, and found her true voice. She wasn't just an artist anymore, she was a storyteller, a connector, someone who had learned to live authentically. Clara had come full circle. And for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace with what lay ahead. The future was uncertain, but Clara knew one thing for sure, she was ready to face it, one song at a time. Clara stood by the window, watching the rain gently tap against the glass. The soft rhythm of the droplets reminded her of the moments she had spent alone in the cabin, the quiet solitude that had allowed her to find herself again. It had been a year since she had decided to take control of her journey, a year since she walked away from the bright lights of fame to rediscover what truly mattered to her. And now, as the world continued to spin outside, Clara knew she had found something that she had long been searching for: peace, purpose, and a sense of belonging that came from within. The music industry, which had once felt like an all-consuming force, was now a part of her past. But it wasn't just a past she was running away from, it was a past that had shaped her, had made her who she was today. Clara had built her career on others' expectations, but in the process, she had lost her connection to herself. It wasn't until she let go of everything, until she stood in the silence of her own heart, that she realized what true freedom meant. Clara had stepped into the unknown, creating music for herself, not for anyone else. Her last song, the one that had been shared so quietly and so intimately with the world, had become a symbol of that journey. It wasn't the most popular song. It wasn't a chart-topping single. But it was honest. It was real. And it had resonated with the people who needed it most. The song had made its way into unexpected places, a film soundtrack, private playlists, intimate gatherings, and had touched hearts far beyond what she had imagined. The simple act of sharing a piece of herself had opened the door to a new chapter, one she had never anticipated. People had reached out, sharing how her music had helped them find their own voices. It was humbling, and it was enough. That morning, Clara had just finished her morning coffee when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, not expecting anything out of the ordinary, but there was a message from Rachel. "Clara, I know you're probably sick of hearing from me, but I need you to think about this. There's a project on the table. A documentary. Your story, your music. The film team is incredible, they're offering complete creative control. This is the opportunity to tell your journey the way you want to, no filters, no expectations. You can share your truth." Clara paused, staring at the message. A documentary? Her first instinct was to turn it down. She had stepped away from the spotlight for a reason. The last thing she wanted was more cameras, more eyes on her. But then, the words from her fans, the messages of support, came flooding back. They wanted to hear her story, not the one that was packaged and sold, but the real one, the one of struggles, growth, and healing. She texted Rachel back, "Okay, let's talk about it. But I need to make sure this is something I can do on my own terms. I'm not interested in a show." Rachel's response was quick, "Of course. This is yours to shape however you want. The team is here to support your vision." Clara let out a deep breath. She wasn't sure what this next step would look like, but she knew it was time to share her truth. If this documentary was going to happen, it had to be done the right way, no gimmicks, no gloss, just her. A few months later, Clara found herself in a studio, sitting across from the filmmakers. It felt strange to be back in front of a camera again, especially after all the time she had spent avoiding them. But as the documentary crew asked her questions about her past, about her journey, about what she had learned through her music, Clara found herself feeling more comfortable with each passing moment. There was something freeing about sharing her story, not for fame, but to show others that they weren't alone in their struggles. "Clara, what would you say to someone who feels stuck?" one of the filmmakers asked, their voice gentle but curious. Clara thought for a moment. The question hit her hard, because she had been that person, stuck, lost in the noise of the world, trying to fit into a mold that wasn't her own. "I'd tell them that it's okay to not have everything figured out," Clara said, her voice steady. "It's okay to take a step back, to give yourself permission to breathe. The world will try to tell you who you should be, but in the end, only you can define who you are. And it's never too late to start over, to reinvent yourself. The important thing is to keep moving forward, even if it's just one small step at a time." The filmmaker nodded, capturing her words on camera. Clara knew that her journey wasn't over, it was just beginning. But now, she felt ready. Ready to share not only her music but the lessons she had learned along the way. A few weeks later, the documentary was released. Clara hadn't anticipated the overwhelming response it received. People all over the world watched, not just to see the artist they remembered, but to understand the woman behind the music. The film wasn't filled with flashy interviews or extravagant performances, it was a quiet, honest portrayal of Clara's life, her struggles, and her eventual rebirth. It was raw. It was vulnerable. And it resonated deeply with those who had followed her over the years. The most surprising part of it all was how the music had taken on a new meaning. The songs Clara had written, especially the one that had started it all, became anthems of healing for those who had been watching her journey from the sidelines. It was no longer just her story, it was theirs too. As Clara sat in her cabin that evening, watching the last of the daylight fade away, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The journey had been difficult, sometimes painful, but it had led her to this moment, the moment where she could finally say that she had found herself. She picked up her guitar, her fingers finding the familiar strings. She didn't need the world to validate her anymore. She didn't need the industry's approval. All she needed was the music, the people who truly understood her, and the quiet moments that allowed her to hear her own heart. Clara had discovered a new beginning, one that was hers to create. And with that, she played the first note of a song she hadn't yet written, the song of her future. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?